across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Yeah, thank you to Julia. She's back on Monday, of course, right here at the home of common sense. This is Talk. We're speaking a new language here. Criminals, even rapists, are free to pick their own gender, with the government refusing to force the police and courts to record biological sex. I mean, you know, we do arrive in these sort of incremental moments of confusion. This one is right up there. What is behind the gender match? Serious question. What is behind all of this? Also this afternoon, Reform UK forced candidates who stood at the general election to sign gagging orders before they could stand, it's been revealed. However, party sources claim the unusual move was done in error. I mean, of all parties that want to gag free speech, surely not the Reform guys. And the mad dash to net zero risks crashing Britain's economy, with the poorest in society to bear the brunt, according to a leaked government document. I mean, who'd have thought it? We'll have more on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Let me take this aspect. Fighting crime has come a long way. I think we can all agree on that. Back in the days of the old Victorian detectives of Scotland Yard and beyond, they had very little to go on. A magnifying glass, a good eye for a moody footprint, and a healthy dose of copper's instinct. That's how they rolled back then. Technology was yet to be, and the ability to fight and solve crime had obvious limitations. You can only imagine the conversations in the canteen at the cop shop. One day, imagine what it'll be like, Watkins. It won't look like this. There'll be machines and technology that will do all of this stuff for us. The old Bill could only dream of what wonderful investigative techniques might be coming their way in years to come. And of course, over the years, the tech did come. Fingerprinting, infrared blood sourcing, CCTV, and of course, DNA. I mean, if you want to solve any kind of crime, you need the fullest picture of what happened and who you think done it. Today, that progress has been somewhat curtailed by the jaw-dropping, although not wholly surprising, revelation that biological sex can be erased from criminal records. I mean, the most fundamental of facts when you try to solve a case. Can you imagine? We're looking for a perpetrator, 5'10", brown hair, blue eyes. Yeah, is it a man or a woman? Not sure. You don't need to know. Seriously? I mean, Agatha Christie novels would have been somewhat compromised. I see Poirot has nicked another non-binary down there in Weymouth. I mean, where would you go with this? So today, despite the extraordinary progress in fighting crime with tech, etc., many police forces are recording crime by male suspects as though they were committed by women at the request of the perpetrator, or based on how the person, here it comes, presents, how they wish to identify. You can be whatever you like. This is a wider problem, of course. It's not just crime, this story. Cancer referrals have been missed and previous convictions overlooked because biological sex has been erased from official data on health, crime and education, according to a review. We'll talk to the person who penned this review as well shortly. The review was commissioned by the last Conservative government and released on Wednesday. It found that the word gender started to replace the word sex in the collection of data back in the 1990s. Who knew it? And for the past 10 years, robust and accurate data on biological sex has been lost. Alice Sullivan, Professor Alice Sullivan, was the person that carried out the study for University College London, investigated all public bodies and found the meaning of sex is no longer stable in administrative or major survey data. Sullivan's review found inconsistencies in the way sex and gender were recorded and conflated. Some official surveys were found to remove sex altogether and only collected information on gender identity. I mean, isn't this massively dangerous? I mean, genuinely dangerous. I asked the question, what is behind this gender madness? I mean, what is behind the gender madness? A serious question. When you consider how many areas of life, and we're not just talking about one or two sort of left-wing think tanks, we're talking about the big boys, huge global banking corporations being an obvious example, branches of government, the government as well, education, health, crime fighting. What would be the intrinsic desire to allow a perpetrator of a crime, a potential perpetrator of a crime, to identify, when it came to their gender, their sex, whatever word you want to use, are they male or female, they can choose whichever one they like. Now, if you gave the wrong name to the cops, you'd be in trouble. If you gave the wrong date of birth, if you tried to somehow hide your identity by shaving your head and putting some colourful contacts in your eyeballs, all of that, well, you can't do that. But you can actually say you're a bloke when you're a woman, or a woman when you're a bloke. I mean, come on, this is really... What I'm asking the question, where does it come from, this? Genuine question. Where does it come from? I was reading a reply that somebody got when they asked Virgin Active, the gyms, about the changing room facilities. And they said the changing rooms are, this is Virgin Active, are split between male and female, with children attending up to the age of 8 years old of a different gender. For the female changing rooms in particular, this would cover females of all ages, boys up to the age of 8, transgender females and non-binary members. Non-binary is not a thing, by the way. This is a word somebody invented. And a big corporation like Virgin Gyms are putting their name to that. Now, some people who are bisexual now refer to themselves as non-binary. Other people who are looking for a bit of identity that nobody can accurately question utilise the term non-binary. Some people who don't feel particularly masculine in a stereotypical sense and particularly feminine in a feminine sense will go, well, I must be non-binary. But you'd be allowed to use the female changing rooms. I don't know why you'd be allowed to use the female changing rooms, because you say you're non-binary no more than you'd be able to use the male changing. I don't get this, really. It doesn't make sense. It's a bit pervy to me. I don't know what the Virgin Active girls and boys are doing down there, what the desire is to get all these different folk into the same changing room. What is wrong with them? They've got some kind of sick thing going on. I don't know. I'm merely asking. But I do ask the wider question. What is behind it? What do you sense when you look at the gender madness that is enveloping our country? Not just a few left-wing agitators, but big institutions and governments and branches of commerce and business that are adopting this nonsense. They adopt it, they advocate it. In fact, if you don't follow suit, you could be fired from some of those jobs. If you said, "I'm sorry, I don't recognise this non-binary thing." Sam, you're working over there at Goldman Sachs, they'll probably have you out the door by noon. I'm sorry you're going because of your gender-critical position. No, I said non-binary. It's not a thing. There's no medic in the world. There's no elements of anything that can say what that is, other than a phrase that someone invented as a kind of catch-all term for people who just desire to identify a certain way. Non-binary, really? So where do you sense the upside-down world that we currently live in of gender madness? Where do you think it has quite literally come from? What's the root, if you had to trace it? Some will go back to the old Frankfurt School. Look it up if you're not sure, but you'll take the point if you know what I'm saying. Others will simply look at the power of despite governments changing colours from time to time, not in any great way in this country. The other elements, unions, civil servants, institutions like education, don't change their colours. So that would be the kind of the main area where this stuff comes from. 0344 499 1000 is where you'll find us. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Steve N. Allen, the comedian and the broadcaster, is with us. Afternoon to you, Steve.
Good afternoon, it's nice to be here.
Always good to have you with us. So that review finding that erasing biological sex from data has caused serious issues. I mean, it's rather extraordinary. Labour's Annalise Dodds, of course, previously addressed Labour's definition of a woman, which is perhaps an answer as to why we have so many problems. Let's have a listen to what she said.
Labour's definition of a woman? Well, I have to say that there are different definitions legally around what a woman actually is. I mean, you look at the definition within the Equality Act, and I think it just says someone who is adult and female, I think, but then doesn't say how you define either of those things. I mean, obviously, that's then you've got the biological definition, legal definition.
No, with respect, I didn't ask for that. What's the Labour definition?
Well, I think with respect, Emma, I think it does depend what the context is, surely. I mean, surely that is important here. You know, there are people who have decided to that they have to make that transition.
Yeah. That's a grown senior politician who cannot say what a woman is. You know, there are people who, some people say what, you know, they don't quite, and on it goes, Steve. I mean, we really have unequivocally, demonstrably arrived in strange times when this is a question that I have to pose to the nation.
Yeah, it took her longer to answer what woman is than Billy Joel took when he did the song She's Always a Woman to Me. In fact, you probably get a better definition by listening to that if you want it, but say you have to hang around one.
Yes. And I don't know why Annalise Does was speaking into a 1950s watering can either, but that's another story.
Do you not think it all stems from fear of causing offence? Not all, most of it. The reason why so many people go along with it is because they see very little downside or cost to actually taking the action, and they have been convinced that there is a big cost of not taking the action. Look who you might offend. I mean, I remember, so back in, you say this started in the 90s, I remember the forms used to have sex in it, and it slowly started to change to gender, and I'm not just being flippant here. I genuinely thought it was to stop us doing the joke, sex, yes please. I just thought it was like a different word that we thought meant the same as gender. And
I'm 100% with you on that. I didn't think there was any sort of obvious difference between the two other than they just changed the word.
Yeah, but then you get into the 2000s and people start saying there's a difference between sex and gender. And at that stage, I was like, all right, no, fair enough. I'd never bothered to Google either word. You're telling me that they're separate and that gender is less set in stone would be the way of doing it. And do you know what? At that point, you think, OK, but then what you don't do is start to delete one of the forms off the data, because you need them both. If you've separated them out, you need both. And it's not like we live in an era where data storage is a problem. Like Microsoft Excel will let you have another column, fill your boots. But the idea of removing one of them, that's the scandal here. Yes, of course, we could have a row about whether people should be allowed to change their gender. All of it will be meaningless in comparison to the loss of data. That's what you've done. And that's what people want to control, because there's a group of people who want gender to be more important than sex, because sex is the thing they can't change. And gender is. And if you can get that taken off the forms, all of a sudden only one of them matters. And I find it annoying that the argument started as these two words mean different things. And therefore, I'd have thought, well, you need them both. And then this push to get rid of one. That's where the scandal happened. Yeah,
absolutely. What I found quite fascinating about this report was that this began in the 1990s. So without sounding too conspiratorial, Steve, and did that just happen because somebody came up with an idea that, you know, gender was a better word, it was just as simple as that, and it was interchangeable, it meant the same thing as sex? Or was this whole kind of strange gender madness agenda kind of happening then? Was that the start of something that perhaps we never called it out or spotted it at the time, but it's responsible for where we are today? There was a conscious decision to get this thing rolling.
No, I mean, maybe. I suppose it's unprovable. I would think it's more likely that they spotted a weakness, a chink in the armour, because we'd gone through this thing of thinking, oh, gender's a better word than sex. Sex might, you know, it also has many different meanings, but one of them means a bit of the old... So maybe that's why they stopped using it. But I think it left an open goal to be able to move in, redefine a term that people would let that redefinition happen to. And yes, maybe there's some conspiracy there, but surely there weren't the numbers. Surely most people go along with it because of politeness. They're told, if you just slap out your definition of what a woman is, you might upset some people that are vulnerable. And that's all you need to get into someone's brain to make them think, oh, I'd better riff for about 15 minutes on what a woman is instead. That will be the polite thing.
I mean, if you stood in the street half an hour ago saying, I'm neither a man nor a woman, you know, some very decent medics would come along and probably escort you to a special place to have have yourself sorted out. Today, if you were to do that, you get given a TV show. I mean, it's an extraordinary place we've arrived in.
Yeah, that's not a bad, that's better advice than my agent's giving me in ages.
Let's move to this story. This is the mad dash to net zero, which could crash the economy. I mean, who'd have thought it? The push for net zero could slash economic growth and harm the poorest. This is actually according to a government warning. We'll speak to Harry Cole later. He's presenting Drive, but he was the person that unveiled this bit of information. Let's have a listen to Lee Anderson, the MP, addressing the net zero obsession at Prime Minister's Question Time yesterday.
Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister a very simple question on behalf of all the net zero sceptics. If we became net zero tomorrow, by how much would it reduce the Earth's temperature by? Simple question.
Minister. Mr. Speaker, net zero is of course not easy, but it's a huge opportunity to boost our growth, our jobs and our economy. And so he knows my views on that. But you know, he complains that our better ideas if they stop fawning over Putin. And I understand the member for Clacton wants to be Prime Minister. He can't even lead a party that fits in the back of a taxi.
Well, he got his little gag in there at the end, Steve, and never really answered the question. It was classic sort of politician's answer, etc. But this is rather disturbing that we could see GDP slash by 10%, 1 trillion in global stranded assets, causing markets potentially to have such shocks that the UK will be affected by it. I mean, this is, I guess, a report any of us who bothered to think about it could have written.
Yeah, and as you say, it's a government report, so there is the chance this has been baked into their thinking as a thing to avoid. And time will tell, and I'm sure I'll be back on the show in a few months finding out that I was wrong. But, I mean, you know, we can live in hope. That's the theory. Yeah, what's happening here is the speed of change, isn't it? That if you do things so quickly, there are some huge assets, some power plants and things like that, that still have value in them that you just effectively write off. Well, they're so big that will have a material impact on the global economy. And I thought this was all about you wait till you get to the end of something's life and you replace it. When you want to change it to a different thing, you replace it then. That's what I did with those flipping light bulbs that they wanted me to have. When we went from incandescent to the ones that were the long life ones that took 5 minutes to warm up. Slowly but surely. I didn't do it in one day. I didn't just go around throwing away something I didn't need. And if I could do it with light bulbs, the government can do it with an entire nation's infrastructure. Surely to goodness. And I know I say this all the time, but they keep promising there are eco things that will save us money. Do those first. Yeah. That's your pecking order. Get them done, and some of the money you've saved, spend that on your light bulbs or whatever.
But yes, yeah, it's a certain irony that there's a type of light bulb called incandescent, given how frustrating it is to find the right one. Never lost on me that. Steve, stay with us. Steve and Alan, the broadcaster and comedian, looking at the big stories of the day. We'll come to that story of the Reform Party and the gagging order allegation, and also Brexit's impact on the economy. Good, bad or indifferent? We'll have more of that. And, of course, your comments along the way as well. 0344 499 1000. Straightforward question when it comes to all the gender madness. And we have many stories almost on a daily basis spewing out about gender and the whole obsession, the evangelical obsession with it. What is behind it? Where do you sense that came from? Is it political? Is it part of a sort of grander plan somewhere? I don't sound too tinfoil hatty here, but what's going on there? 0344 499 1000.
Vladimir Putin has shown over and over again that he uses agreements, talks, to reposition himself, re-equip himself. So we've seen this before, and we've seen this with Ukraine. Assurances were made, agreements were signed between Russia and other countries about protecting the integrity, the independence and the sovereignty of Ukraine, particularly at the point when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons arsenal.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
One here, no name given, says, surely the simple solution to the gender issue is adding an extra field to all databases, record the birth sex plus the gender people now identify as. Yeah, but you can't do that because if you identify with your newer gender, your old gender is dead. In fact, even to bring it up can be seen as a capital offence in some places. You're dead naming me. I mean, this is all part of the nonsense, of course. I slightly jest, but I think that would be the reason they wouldn't do it, because people will go, well, no, that's not my gender. That person no longer exists and never did. Weird, huh? Steve N. Allen is with us, looking at the big stories of the day. Interesting one from Reform UK, which we discover courtesy of the Daily Telegraph today, Steve. Reform apparently required general election candidates and local branch officials to sign a non-disclosure agreement, one of those NDAs, to maintain confidentiality up to the last election. Reform have said this is it was a mistake somehow. But yeah, I mean, that's the party of free speech, surely, of all places. It wouldn't be over there at Reform HQ.
Yeah, we can chalk this one up as not a good look. How did they not see this coming?
Yeah.
I mean, the situation was you got two main parties. One of them had 14 years of getting it wrong. The other one's got current time of getting it wrong. So this would be a great opportunity to be an unproven party. And what are they doing? They are managing to implode so well. It takes normally it takes parties hundreds of years to have this level of chaos and disarray because of these non-disclosure things. Now, there was Nick Morris, who was a former council candidate, who said, what are they trying to hide? And he's just asking questions. It's reminiscent of what someone said after a certain stabbing, isn't it? He's just asking questions. Now, the thing is, I don't think there's anything to hide, but the question itself is damning, isn't it? That's exactly what's happened here. It was only the council candidates being forced to sign the NDA that was a mistake. Apparently, the actual parliamentary, those candidates should have signed it. Right. The other one was a mistake. They still count, though, if they've been signed. I mean, unless you're willing to rescind them right now. Null and void them right now, and that'd be a step in the right direction. But I mean, it's the new problem they're having because of what happened with. Well, it all starts with Elon saying Rupert Lowe was a better leader. Then that's it. Rupert Lowe's caused upset. He called Nigel Farage the Messiah, which is not true. Jesus only came back once so far. So Farage has had way more reattempts at this. Yeah, they're managing to fall out, and there are so few of them. Like by suspending the whip of one person, you get rid of 20% of your parliamentary party. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. Although, Reform might say, not unreasonably, they might say, Steve, look, we're a new party. We're finding our way in lots of areas. We're also trying to establish who is friend or foe. We know that, we haven't got the infrastructure in place for, candidate selection and all sorts of other areas of the sort of party machinery. So while we're doing all of that, and while, we might hire a wrong 'un here and there, or, we might get something wrong, we'll do an NDA thing just to cover our backsides. It could be that. And some might say, do you know what, it's not a bad idea under the circumstances, because when people get disgruntled in the world of politics, they sing like a flipping canary, don't they?
Yeah, but the thing that's covered by the NDA shouldn't have any problems in it anyway. Like the material that you get to see by being a candidate shouldn't have some absolute humdinger of a scandal waiting to happen. And their problem shouldn't be what the resources of the party offer to the candidates. It seems their problem has been the candidates they didn't have time to vet properly. They went to a vetting agency that didn't bother. They just took the money and were like, yeah, well, we didn't even Google their name and the word Hitler to see what's been posted before, which seems like the very bare minimum that one could do. So that's, yeah, I take the point, but I don't think that's where the problems of needed work. And yet they still brought them in anyway.
Indeed. And this one as well. The economic impact of Brexit has been only overly exaggerated, says Jeremy Hunt, claiming exports to the EU have been less affected than some expected. Let's have a listen to that momentous moment when the big result was announced.
The total number of votes cast in favour of leave was 17,410,742. This means that the UK has voted to leave the European Union.
Yeah. I was just looking for myself in the crowd there, Steve. I was actually there on that night in Manchester when that was announced. And, of course, that was 2016. Here we are nearly a decade later, and people are still squabbling about Brexit. Interesting that Jeremy Hunt, who I thought was a Remainer. I'm not sure. Maybe I've got that wrong. But anyway, Jeremy Hunt said, look, those people that said it was going to be a disaster, it's not as bad as some people have said.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more of the camp of, like, what we need to do is not talk about it anymore because it's now in our history. It's not like it's a current debate anymore. Getting it right can definitely be a current debate, but this kind of, oh, if you thought it was going to be a disaster, it's not been as bad. It's also true to say if you thought it was going to be the best thing since sliced bread, it's not lived up to your expectations.
Yes.
Both camps are huge because they're the only camps available. There was a survey last year, wasn't it? 55% of people said they regretted the way that they voted, who voted for it. Again, doesn't make a difference. You voted for it at the time, and the only thing you got two options. You can sit there moaning about the situation, or you can try and make the situation work. And no one wants to do the second one. Why not? Even Jeremy Hunt getting in the old retro thing. I remember the days not just 2016, but before, I guess it would have been before 2010, where you would have gone to a pub, and if someone would have brought up an issue to do with EU trade deals, you'd have thrown them out that pub. That's not what people used to talk about. Can't we get back to that when we're just people again trying to make this country work?
Do you know what? My takeaway from this conversation has just reminded me, actually, Steve, that I can remember when I was on TalkSport doing sort of 10 o'clock at night show, and we would sort of come up with, different subjects. Sometimes they would be specifically related to the news. Other times they'd be random ones. And I saw a story in one of the broadsheets one morning about, what would happen if the UK left the EU. So this is like 2010 or something. No one's talking about it. Maybe it was even before that, probably 2007 maybe. I thought that's quite an interesting question. And so I went on air that night and I threw out this, I told the story, some people are suggesting, we could live outside. We could not get a phone call on that subject for love nor money. Nobody gave a hoot. It just didn't. We had people texting, going, what are you talking about this for? It's boring. Why? Nobody cares about this. Quite literally. And then, of course, once something penetrates the zeitgeist, as it were, all change. Now we could talk about that every day and have a full switchboard, even today.
Yeah, that's part of what happened, though, isn't it? It changed it from the dullest thing in the world, European politics. What? But they changed it into your feelings. Like, oh, you feel this way, and if people disagree with you, you're okay to feel disgruntled. If you can get someone in disgruntled territory, you've won. They then become this huge political force. Things they hadn't cared about before, all of a sudden, how very dare they disagree with me?
I can remember somebody texting in saying, can you stop using this American-y phrase, the EU, like anyone knows what that is? It's the European Union. How bizarre is that? I mean, this is in our lifetimes. And it's great, though, to see, yes, we're not doing that badly compared to other countries. I mean, if you look at Germany, it's through the floor. France ain't doing much better. We're going to be beating both of those countries in terms of how European, as distinct from European Union, European countries are faring. So Yeah, I mean, the doomsday scenario has not been realised. We didn't even get on to talking about France and their survival manual they've given to citizens in case they're invaded. So I think people have stopped caring about France. Just wave a white flag like you always have done, France. I think that's what it says on the front cover. There it is. Listen, Steve, thank you as ever. Steve N. Allen, the comedian and the broadcaster with us on the programme. More from you on the way. Really intrigued about the gender kind of issue that is always alive and well in different ways. But where did it come from? How did we get to this point of this ever being a discussion that our forefathers, and I mean essentially just our grandparents or even our own parents, would have looked at and said, this is just crazy, clearly. Yet here we are. What's behind it? What's the root cause of it? And where did it come from? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000. Jenny in Oxford says, so the male doctor changes his gender, but his qualifications still remain with him. Why, if his life history is no longer with him? The change, yeah, this came up, didn't it, recently? There was an issue about that I can't remember the specifics. It was only a couple of weeks ago, this story. Why are his qualifications when he is now a she? If you supposedly have to remove all aspects of a person's previous life, but you keep the qualifications. I mean, I get it and I understand the question. Jenny, thank you very much indeed for that. Male criminals, including rapists, are being recorded as women based on self-declaration when it comes to gender identity. A new review commissioned by the last government also criticises the NHS for prioritising gender identity over biological sex, leading to clinical risks like missed cancer screenings. Campaigners warn that conflating sex and gender undermines women's rights, public policy and the accuracy of vital records. In a moment, we'll speak to Kelly J. Keane, leader of Party of Women. First, the author of this report, Professor Alice Sullivan, Professor, Sociology, University College London. Alice, good to have you with us. Hi.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's a pleasure. I would say that regardless of, the whole, without getting into the whole explosion of the gender argument, we could, female toilets, male changing rooms, etc. All of that to one side. Is this not overtly and demonstrably fairly dangerous, regardless of where anybody sits on this issue?
Absolutely. It is dangerous to have inaccurate data, particularly when it comes to health. And the irony is really that the people it's most dangerous for are trans people themselves, because they are the ones who are liable to be missed for screenings, for example, because we don't have accurate records on their sex.
And it follows through that the similar issues and concerns are not just in health, but in, I mentioned crime as well. Areas I was once stopped by a police officer, had to get who checked my details. You know, one of them, I can't remember what they're called now. Name, you know, date of birth, all the rest of it. And I got my date of birth wrong when they checked it. And, you know, this officer was not very pleased with me. But it's only now when I think about it, I could have actually said I was a woman in that moment, and that bit would have been okay. So the date of birth was almost a capital offence. But if I'd said, like, quite clearly a man and gone, but I'm a woman, he'd have had no choice but to record me as a woman based on this.
Absolutely, and I think the analogy with age is a very good one. You might feel young, but you are the age you are, and we will acknowledge that, you know, people have their feelings and their identities, and then there are some basic demographic facts about you, and they're different things. And, you know, it's absolutely fine to ask people about their identity, and I think there are many instances where it would be very useful to have data, accurate data on transgender identities, but that has to be alongside sex, not instead of asking people what their sex is.
Yeah. One of the areas that I'm absolutely fascinated about this, and I was just telling the same story to Adam, our producer, that, you know, I've been doing this job 20 odd 30 years, whatever. We never had a debate on any of this. I can promise the nation and the world in 20 odd years never once debated gender/trans issues. Even when Nadia won Big Brother back in the day, a trans woman, nobody even mentioned that. They just said, oh, Nadia's won. It never even, if ever there was a time when you were going to initiate a debate on that, it would have been something as big as Big Brother. Never got mentioned. Then suddenly, half an hour ago, the world went mad, it seemed, and this becomes a daily subject. But my question, I think, Alice, is, from what I'm looking at in your research here, this isn't as new as we thought. This goes back to the 90s. Is that right?
I think confusion around the word gender certainly goes back to the 90s. We used to talk about sex, and it was really clear. And then people started to use gender as a euphemism for sex. But people still kind of knew what they meant, and they knew there were only two sexes. They didn't think there were five or however many. Yeah. But then gender started to mean other things. It started to mean gender identity. And so a lot of this is confusion about this word gender. And this is one reason why I've recommended that we should stop using gender. We need to go back to talking about sex when we mean sex. And if we're talking about gender identity, we should be clear that we're talking about gender identity. Just using gender as a sort of polite synonym for sex doesn't work anymore, because people have got very confused.
Yeah, and there are very good, certainly in the health area of life, very good reasons why it would be important to put your birth sex on a form when it comes to medical records. I mean, this could be, you know, quite literally could be an issue that might be a matter of life and death.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're female and you identify in a different way, you've still got a uterus, for example, and you've still got a cervix. And if you're male and you identify as a woman, you don't have a uterus and you don't have a cervix. So these are just basic unchangeable facts. You can't actually change your sex. That says nothing about not respecting how you might feel, but we need to acknowledge that people have a sex and it doesn't change.
Do you sense at all, and I don't know whether there's a territory that you can get into, but I'd be just interested as a sociologist, whether you think there is that politics plays a part in this. I mean, when they changed the forms, our previous guest, Steve, wondered whether they changed it because every time somebody, particularly boys, saw the word sex on a form, they wanted to write yes, please, or something like that. And it was a bit cheeky. So, you know, almost seaside postcard territory. So they changed it because most of us saw sex and gender as kind of interchangeable in the spirit of the question. But do you think politics was a driving force behind this change?
I think the gender coming in the 90s, I think it was a bit of an Americanism. And you're right, people do get squeamish about the word sex, and they think that gender sounds I don't know, less basic or something. Yeah. But the confusion between sex and gender identity, certainly it's about politics, and it's been about the gender self-identification agenda, which has kind of entailed almost pretending that sex doesn't exist.
Yeah. Listen, great to get your thoughts on this, Alex. It's a very thorough report. Thank you, Professor Alice Sullivan, Professor of Sociology, University College London. Let's speak to Kelly J. Keane, leader of the Party of Women. Kelly, good afternoon to you.
Hi, good afternoon.
Nice to have you with us. It's quite refreshing to read a bit of common sense in a report. I thought. But we kind of shouldn't be here, but it has thrown up the question. And I know this is something you've, never thought you'd find yourself dedicating most of your days and life to. But that wasn't in the plan when you were 16, was it? But here you are today, talking almost exclusively on these kind of issues. But to me, the mystery is where the whole kind of, can we call it a campaign? I think we can. Where has it come from, this kind of gender madness?
Oh, gosh, it's come from a lot of places, and most of them will have something to do with money and power and profit. So those things are quite easy to identify. The motivation is if you're a pharmaceutical company and you can sell puberty blockers, and you can sell that particular puberty blocker for a whole brand new cohort, and then you have medical patients for life, then I think it's easy to see where that comes from. I recently found out the first woman in the United Kingdom to have her breasts removed on the basis that she thought she was a man was in the 1940s.
Wow. So
this, I would say that probably was a homophobic sort of pursuit by those doctors. But, there's an industry around it. We're even using words like gender identity. And I really do think we need to stop using these sorts of terms. They don't mean anything. They really don't. And I think once you say to someone that gender identity is a real thing and that trans identities are real things, and it's not just preferences like we all have, and they may be normal range, they may not be normal range. But when you start giving people these categories and validating them, then I think they're more attractive. So from the 90s, and certainly from the year 2000, and some of these psychiatrists and psychologists might be speaking out against it, but they were all part of generating and manufacturing this industry that we now see as sort of this gender-affirming, gender nonsense industry. And in the United Kingdom, there is no greater manipulator and coercive force than the NHS, which has this stuff all the way through it and has knowingly harmed children.
Do you, and I also sense in addition to that, Kelly, that there is quite clearly a lot of politics around this too, and maybe when a company is asked to respect people's gender, it sounds a little bit like saying respect people's race, and it's in that category. So psychologically, we don't want our staff being horrible to people. We don't want anybody, don't want to be accused of a phobia or an ism. So we better adopt this kind of stuff. That's also running in parallel with all of this.
Well, yes and no. So yes, it is, because it's an easy box to tick. So, for example, if I take a train company, they might put lanyards on their staff. They might do a nice big rainbow flag all over their carriages. And then they won't have any facilities for people with disabilities to actually get on the train. So they'll put up at platforms that don't quite reach the train. They'll completely, repeatedly fail to get their staff to come and help someone in a wheelchair on or off a train. So it's a very cheap way of saying, look at us, aren't we so great? The same as companies that talk about race, to be quite honest. They will be the same companies that use very cheap labour in other countries, which I would say was arguably racist, as well as not having very good working practices and policies. But at the same time, they will have these sort of pride, progress, rainbow lanyards. So I think it's virtue signalling is a term we use quite often, but it very much is very, very thin veneer, no depth to it whatsoever, when the real hard work of actually paying decent wages and looking after your staff properly is often absent from the companies that force the pride flag down our throats.
Yeah, you just reminded me, do you remember the story couple of years ago now, maybe 3 years ago, when the train guard on some kind of train had said, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls," and some half-wit who, oddly, I think actually worked for the train company but was a passenger at this capacity, wrote to them and said that they were disgusted because they were non-binary, which is a completely invented phrase, has no basis in anything biologically or anywhere else for that matter. But that was the gist of the complaint. How dare you say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm non-binary, I'm offended. But that was that you could just laugh at that and write it off and say this is an idiot. But the train company, if you remember, on a public tweet said, I never forget their words, "We are really sorry for you. We will never use such language again," they said, as if they just effed and jeffed all over the place. Such language. They literally said, "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls." So again, the sort of virtuous nature of the corporation that doesn't want to be seen as, when no one in the real world thinks that other than the corporation.
Yeah, 100%. Look, it's the same everywhere. There's this sort of faux apology. They'll erase women's spaces. They'll have unisex toilets on the platform or whatever, and there's no apology to women, no matter how much we are affronted or uncomfortable or refuse to actually use the lavatory anymore in those sort of spaces because they're not for us, they're for everybody. We never get any apologies. And I would say to women, if you're fed up with this, women or gentlemen, like if that annoyed you about that tweet, we have to start. The trouble is, we're all reasonable. We've all got far too much to do to write every time we're slightly irked by these nonsensical terms. We don't email, we don't bother complaining at all. Well, I think it's about time we did. And then maybe just constant tip kind of tapping on their shoulder and saying, look, we're not going to put up with this. We're annoyed. Maybe that will have a desired effect. Yeah. And maybe we'll stop being such a silent, reasonable, rational majority, but will actually be quite noisy and difficult to ignore. Yeah, the word majority there, I think, does count for something in this respect quite a bit. Listen, Kelly, great to have you with us as ever. Kelly J. Keane, leader of the Party of Women, just speaking common sense, basically, stuff we all know. Your response on this, it's interesting, she talked about pharmaceutical companies being pretty much pivotal in the advancement of this, mainly from the States initially, but the state sneezes, everyone else catches a cold. There is politics in this as well. I think corporations all playing their part, all fueling into it. And of course, the answer is if you're not on board with the language and with this kind of invented thing of anyone can be a woman, anyone can be any of 115, if you're not on board with that, then you're not a nice person. That I really think is quite central to how this thing has been sold. You think there's something weird about somebody who wants to invent a gender for themselves? Yeah, I do actually. I really do. I think that's a bit strange. Where do you sense it all come from? 0344 499 1000.
Has it caused some turbulence? Of course. Has it on the edges caused some people to be disconcerted? Yes. Does it make a fundamental difference to what we're going to do on May the 1st? No. And does it make almost any difference in the country? Virtually none whatsoever. So, you know, obviously members think, well, he was doing some good stuff, he was doing some good work, he was putting out some good tweets. You know, why is this happening to him?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 10 to 2. A little bit of breaking news. Former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has been cleared in a police investigation into the SNP's finances, but her husband, Peter Morrell, has appeared at Edinburgh Sheriff's Court today, charged with embezzlement of party funds. He made no plea and was committed for further examination and granted bail. Again, Nicola Sturgeon facing no charges, cleared by police. Let's go back to your comments. We're talking 1 second to Miranda in Cumbria. First, let's get a voice note on this whole gender issue from Peter.
I got suspended and investigated from the NHS. I was on full pay and I was off work. I was suspended for 3 and a bit months because I refused to call somebody who identified as non-binary as that or them. I called her by a name and a gender and I got suspended for that. It cost the NHS a lot of money paying me whilst I was off. In the end, the investigation proved nothing really, but that's how woke the NHS was, and that's 3 years ago, mate.
Yeah. Whoever's responsible for... Thank you, Pete. That's, to me, fascinating but not surprising point on the NHS. Suspended and investigated. I mean, if ever you wanted... I hate using that phrase Orwellian. Sometimes you have to go there. And this is an example of it. You used the wrong language because we didn't like it. But the language I used was accurate. No, not in the new world. It isn't accurate. But it is accurate. It's literally accurate. And you're asking me to identify or recognise a set of words that are really non-existent and certainly not based in any kind of fact anywhere. Well, it doesn't matter. We're going to investigate you. I mean, that's just bizarre. That's really eerie. That's quite terrifying that is the case. And it would have been expensive to do so as well. Thank you, Pete. Miranda in Cumbria. On this point, Miranda, what are your thoughts? Hi.
Well, I've had 111 service. It was an out-of-hours service. And essentially, the first question that they ask you is what gender you are. Not your name or anything like that. And I just find that completely... It's ridiculous because obviously I was in pain at the time, but they're more concerned about what you identify as rather than your actual
condition. Yeah, because if they get it wrong, they might find themselves like Pete, suspended somewhere.
Well, the problem is that was NHS England who devised these questions. Yeah. And NHS England also spent half their time trying to men who are living as women and women who live as men, decided making sure that they aren't actually missing out their either prostate exam or the cervical smears. And it's non-productive effort and a complete waste of resources at the end of the day. It's just insane.
100%. Miranda, thank you very much indeed for that. And Frank makes a really good point in West Yorkshire, who says, how come all the debate about gender and sex seems to revolve around men that want to be known as women? I never hear an outcry from women who want to identify as men. Doesn't this tell a story, says Frank? It does. I mean, once in a while you do, but generally speaking, you're absolutely spot on. It's also something that, not exclusively, but mostly appears to be white men who, and I don't know why that is. White men you don't tend to see even as a proportion, quite so many black or brown men saying, I want to be a woman. Now, I don't know. I know people have previously tried to investigate that specific point as to, I don't know what the upshot of that was, but there is a disproportionality issue around that. But certainly on the men being, we very rarely interview women who identify as men in these kind of debates. Jackie is in Devon. On this curious question of where this gender madness began, Jackie, what are your thoughts? Afternoon to you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm a bit nervous. It's my first time.
It's all right. Sounding fine.
Bear with me. I think it's really bankrolled by big pharmaceutical money. I think lots of people have joined on the bandwagon. So you've got your incels, your fundamental misogynists like Tate and all those people join in the bandwagon. Then you've got the do-gooders as well, the women who with Stockholm syndrome who think, the Be Kind Brigade. But I think fundamentally it's big pharmaceutical money that has lost all the funding from HIV because that is really well managed, and now that it's pretty cheap to get antiretroviral drugs and things. Yep. And so now this is the next big thing. So you've got surgery, which is very costly in America particularly, and then with a lifetime full of drugs that people will need to maintain this ridiculous pantomime, basically. So that's
there's more than one thing going on there, isn't there? In that respect, so. I 100% agree with you. I think the kind of financial thing, Stonewall and other kind of gay rights organisations who, these people did incredible work with gay, absolutely amazing, life-changing, quite literally for some people, work. They were superb and almost lone voices when others were saying nothing. But then, of course, they ran out of subject matter because people were, we've kind of solved that problem now. I mean,
they ran out of money.
Maybe ran out of, what can we campaign for now? And now it's turned into another area. Jackie, it's a great call and a great point. You did sound fine, by the way. Thank you for that. Claire says, let's talk about Brexit and doing it down. It's a soundbite put out by our Labour regime. Starmer is gagging to get back into bankrupt EU, even giving our fishing rights away. What's next? Britain? Is that what's next, Britain, or what's next, Britain? Either one of the two. Yeah, well, I mean, the fishing rights never really came back, did they? Because Boris didn't really include that in any kind of deal, it seems. 0344 499 1000. What is behind the gender madness? Harry Phibbs joins us in the next section as well, columnist with Conservative Home, of course. Lots to get into. Keep it here. You're listening to Talk. Let's get the news headlines now at exactly 2 o'clock.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of common sense. Criminals, even rapists, would you believe, are free to pick their own gender. Yeah, tell us something we didn't know. But the government refusing to force the police and courts to record biological sex. Why would you not just simply do something so obvious? And also in the interest of basic safety when it comes to crime and health. Details on that. What is behind the gender madness? What's the kind of root cause? You have to trace it back. Where did it begin? Also this afternoon, Reform UK forced candidates who stood at the general election to sign gagging orders before they could stand, it's been revealed. However, party sources claim that the unusual move was actually done in error. I mean, of all parties that would want to espouse freedom of speech, come on. It's the cool cats over there at Reform HQ, surely. More on that too. And former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has been cleared in a police investigation into the SNP's finances. More on that as we get it. Nothing much we can say more on her husband's case, which is at the moment still a live case. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. Now, Jeremy has made a really good point here. Jez in London says, I used to manage teams that designed forms for... Isn't it interesting when we're talking about a subject like what questions are asked on a form, and somebody contacts us who used to design forms? I mean, you couldn't get any better than that. So I used to manage teams that designed forms for government and large organisations. We used gender instead of sex for no better reason than the fact that organisational representatives were very much more comfortable using the term since they thought it meant the same thing anyway and without other connotations. That's quite reassuring to know. And because it sent, there was me wondering, not thinking, but wondering, you know, was there some sort of covert, was there a message that secretly went down the line who put its tentacles out to all areas and contractors saying, you know, we will no longer use the term sex because we are changing the world we live in? It wasn't that. It was an organisational thing, says Jez, and no other connotations but that. And people always thought it meant the same, which they did. Sex, gender. I think to this day, most people think, you know, what's your gender, what's your sex? If you ask that question, you might ask it one or either way, but it would mean the same thing. Well, strictly speaking, of course, we now know they are different things, but yeah, I think most of us see it as the same. Jez, thank you for that. Bill says, what's the end game with this gender agenda? Is it to render us all into one homogenous future? When what you are doesn't matter. I like the gender agenda render thing. Never surrender to the gender agenda. Never surrender to the gender agenda. Don't render or surrender. And there's lots of others, but some I don't think would be appropriate. But you see where we could go with that. Thank you to Bill for that one. This one comes in on the same point from Alan. Gender denial, a lack of social structure, lack of self-identity and a permissive society that actively encourage these behaviours is at the heart of this growing trend of people identifying as other genders or even animals. It's going to be hard to reverse this trend now. Yeah, it's curious. It is that fight for... You can identify however you like. That's fine. Identity politics definitely is a factor in all of this. It's pervasive and it's incredibly dangerous, I would contend. Let's get a word on all the big stories of the day, including this one. Harry Phibbs, columnist at Conservative Home. Harry, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
We were picking up all of those subjects and comments there based on this report from Professor Alice Sullivan, who found that public bodies prioritising gender identity over biological sex, we can see the shortcomings and the problems with that. They are plentiful in the world of crime and perhaps more seriously or equally as seriously in the world of health as well.
Yes, I think there's a danger. Obviously, it's easy to ridicule all this stuff, and there's a danger, therefore, thinking it doesn't matter. And of course it does. If we've got the NHS allowing children to have their bodies mutilated, or we've got men who rape women and then say that they've identified as a woman and want to go into a woman's prison. If we've got people whose freedom of speech to just state the simple reality of being punished, it ceases to be a joke. So I mean, I think it's good that your listeners and the rest of us have the capacity to ridicule it, but it's got a darker side to it. And I think the motives, going back to what was discussed earlier about where did this all come from, I think that it is people who are trying to undermine society. In this particular case, I think trying to undermine the family, but often it'd be the same people on the radical left who were involved in Black Lives Matter or wanting to overthrow capitalism, wanting to destroy private property and all the rest of it. It's all part of an agenda to undermine Western society, and they come at it in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways.
Absolutely right, because there are some countries around the world, I mean, not only would you not get away with this, you might even find yourself in jail for this kind of nonsense, sort of witchcrafty kind of nonsense. And the problems that have been pointed out are, for example, if you have decided that you are no longer a woman and want to live your life as a bloke, but have decided, therefore, all official information on you should record you as a male, therefore you don't get any cervical smear reminders through the post anymore. Things like that, the other way round, prostate reminders or screenings, it's all obvious stuff. And then in its perhaps, even more sinister form, if somebody is a convicted sex offender and they decide to change their gender, we've seen this happen already, even halfway through a court case. But even after that, does their criminal record disappear? I don't even know where that aspect of this appears, but it will certainly change the tone of things. If you used to be a bloke that did terrible things to women, but now identify as a woman and no one has any track record of your previous.
Oh, I mean, it's the record keeping often gets muddled up anyways. It is, without this being distorted. And if anybody challenges this madness, if it's a teacher or someone in the NHS or prison officer saying, "Look, this is completely appalling. This is completely unacceptable. There'll be practical consequences for this." They are then in danger. They're operating in a climate of fear in case they're then accused of transphobia and bigotry and all the rest of it. And so it's much easier, it's much safer for people to just keep quiet and go along with it. And that's how you can get things being hijacked. And that includes in among the politicians, of course. We've got, we get even in the Conservative government, people like Theresa May allowed this to grow, and with Keir Starmer and the Labour government, there's still, there's sort of contradictions in some of the messages that they're putting out. It's still quite a mess.
It really is, and you might think, and particularly if you look at what is happening in America, I know we don't emulate everything in the States, but whereas the new administration there have really gone in hard on this one, and enough of this nonsense and all that goes with it, and the various other facets of these sort of curious contemporary debates about equity and diversity and gender, etc. They've really put a stop to all of this, or the process of putting a stop to it, but it appears we aren't learning quite as fast over here as they are over there. Let's get a word, Harry, on this story. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon cleared in a police investigation into SNP finances. I'm not sure why, but that doesn't actually surprise me. I did wonder whether the case against her was a little tenuous. We know that her husband, now separated, former chief exec at the SNP, Peter Murrell, has appeared in court charged with embezzlement related to £600,000 of party funds. But Nicola Sturgeon is a free woman, it seems.
Yes, and it's right that the threshold is high, isn't it? It's right that there's a presumption of innocence, that you need really strong, clear evidence to prosecute someone, and just saying, "Oh well, she must have known what's going on," that doesn't cut it. It obviously remains the case that the SNP's finances were in a pretty dubious state. But I guess we're constrained by how much we can speculate about it all.
Well, indeed, certainly on the case of Mr. Morrell. Nicola Sturgeon, of course, is completely walking the plank from politics, as we know, to lead a quiet life somewhere in a motorhome. No, not a motorhome, shouldn't say that, but somewhere in the quiet countryside of her native Scotland, never to be seen again. But you could argue, of course, just on a separate point, I guess, Harry, lover or hater, she certainly was a force in Scottish politics.
Yes, and I mean, I think disastrous in terms of all sorts of measures where there was devolved government, and you can compare what was happening in Scotland, what was happening in England. Almost all the record, the school results, all the NHS performance, all the woke stuff. We were discussing about sending rapists off to.
Oh, she'd have been the flag waver on all of this.
Yes. But I mean, certainly a powerful and important politician in her time.
I was always quite staggered during COVID when we used to get those daily press conferences, and sometimes it was Boris, and sometimes it was the Home Secretary or the Health, Matt Hancock, whatever. But in Scotland, Sturgeon did one every single day, as you remember, Harry, and she fronted it every single day, which might have had something to do with this. But given that Scotland and the rest of the UK had pretty much the same, had the same sort of proportionately the same COVID numbers, care home, distressing stories from care homes were pretty much the same across when you balance it all out. And yet, for some reason, Boris's star completely went through the floor during this time, seen as a man that was, either spewing fake news or certainly didn't know what news he was delivering. And Sturgeon's star seemed to rise at that time, despite the fact they were singing from pretty much the same hymn sheet and saying pretty much identical things.
Well, the lockdown was very popular then. I was always sceptical about it, and I think a lot of people who were sort of panicked into supporting it at the time can now see that there was a lot of dishonesty about it, really. But the problem with the devolved government was that in Scotland and Wales they were always pushing for stricter lockdowns, longer lockdowns, keep the schools closed, even the primary schools. And I was reading the memoirs by a chap called Simon Hart, who was the Welsh secretary under Boris Johnson, so was involved in all this. And he says that even though there was evidence that closing the primary schools was unjustified, that the English went along with it because they thought it would be damaging to have a different arrangement in Wales and Scotland. And so the Welsh and Scottish administrations bounced England into being stricter on lockdown and closing the primary schools so that they could say, yes, well, we've got the same policy everywhere. So it was I think very, very damaging to the lives of the children, and very, very limited evidence that it saved any lives at all.
Yeah. Well, indeed. We look at it now and it seems like, just the craziest idea that anyone ever came up with. But hopefully we've learned not to do it again. But don't hold your breath. Let's look at this Reform story, Harry. Reform UK using gagging orders on their parliamentary candidates and other staff in the lead up to the election last year. I mean, of all parties you might think would be a bit more relaxed about free speech, it would be Reform.
Yes, I think the excuse is that there is some rather onerous data requirements, because obviously if you're if you're campaigning for a political party and you go around knocking on doors, you try and sign up people, to try and get their emails to keep in touch with them, and you keep records and all the rest of it. And there's all sorts of rules about data and not being allowed to pass those on. But those apply to all the political parties. All campaigners have advised the basis on which they can collect data. So I don't think that would explain how they're going beyond the requirements in other parties. And so it does look as though Nigel Farage is worried about troublemakers, worried about people sort of infiltrating, wanting to get hold of information, which may well be that Reform UK will be targeted in that way from time to time. But you just have to get on with it, really. Yeah. I think that this there's this sort of paranoid. I mean, just because he's paranoid doesn't mean they aren't out to get him. But it's still not a good look. He should have the self-confidence to just allow people to say what they want.
Yeah, and whatever the internal or specific reasons were around it, and they might have had some, reasonable concerns. They're a new party. They're still finding their way. Never done all of this before on any kind of, so just in case anything goes awry, let's get ourselves covered. It might have been that, but as you rightly say, it's a terrible look. It's a terrible look because it's Reform UK. Speaking of elections and also parties, ministers planning to restrict foreign donors from using UK-registered companies to make unlimited political donations. This comes on the back of this suggestion that Elon Musk could be making an £80 million donation to Reform UK. Although, I sense this story was around about 6 weeks ago, Harry, and then sort of went away. It seems to have come back again, unless it's another 80 million or a different 80 million.
Yes, I think it could be but by the way, I think it might well be that Reform UK would be better off without the money from Elon Musk, because I think it might well, for a party that stresses how patriotic it is, it might well be, even if it's a huge sum of money, better off not having it. But I guess when you've got somebody incredibly rich like Elon Musk, he's got businesses in all sorts of countries, including the United Kingdom. So legally, it might be quite hard if it's a UK company registered in the UK with UK employees, UK staff. It just happens to be owned by Elon Musk. If you're saying that shouldn't be allowed to count as somebody as an entity able to donate money, then you can see that it might not be that straightforward. Trying to tighten up the rules, so maybe the story will keep coming back, and they won't ever be able to quite manage to pin down the law to prevent it.
Indeed. Harry, listen, we hit the clock, sir. Thank you very much, as ever, Harry Phibbs, columnist at Conservative Home. Thank you to him. Back to you, 0344 499 1000. For those who are new to this territory, anything you've picked up on that we've been chatting about, doesn't matter which aspect, do feel free to join in here at the Home of Common Sense, have your say on whatever it is. We do fire out a bit of a thread question at the beginning of the show. What is behind the gender madness? This is reference the curious nature of which we document people in terms of databases, particularly those who've decided to identify as a different gender from birth. Feeds into that question of gender mad. Well, where does it come from? What's the root journey, if you like, of the gender narrative? Because it's doing something that it never used to, that's for sure. 0344 499 1000.
Vladimir Putin has shown over and over again that he uses agreements, talks to reposition himself, re-equip himself. So we've seen this before, and we've seen this with Ukraine. Assurances were made, agreements were signed between Russia and other countries about protecting the integrity, the independence and the sovereignty of Ukraine, particularly at the point when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons arsenal.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Let's get some comments from you. Georgina with you in just a second. This from David. He says, your caller Pete from Liverpool wasn't suspended from work for using an incorrect term. He was suspended from work and investigated and put under stress for using a perfectly correct term that his left-wing public service employer did not want him to use. If that isn't Orwellian, then I don't know what is, says David in the Cotswolds. I mean, it's so bang on, isn't it? You know, I keep thinking of how I would explain it to my kids if I wanted to. Well, obviously wouldn't, too young, but it really is the upside down. The opposite of what you say means it's that. And again, we all try to resist this word Orwellian because it's, you know, it's kind of overused and it's often misused in these sort of debates. But you kind of end up going there. You sort of have to, in a way. Let's get a voice note on the Reform UK story and those NDAs. This comes from Chris.
I am a Reform UK County Council candidate, and yes, I was asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and I did not have the slightest problem with it. Perhaps I wasn't privy to any secret information, but I may have been, and I had no issue with it whatsoever, so please, you lot, stop making a big issue of it.
Well, it's a big issue in that no one else has ever done anything like that as far as we know from political parties and NDAs, and it will naturally throw up a question when there are debates around, you know, what is happening with behind the scenes at the moment at the top level. But naturally it's going to throw up some questions from people who are supporters in a democracy. Because that isn't standard stuff. If, you know, in a free society, if you want to stand for a political party, you wouldn't ordinarily be asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You might be in North Korea, but not here. But I did, in fairness, Chris, I did shine some light of sympathy onto Reform and just simply wondered whether it was in the complete chaos as any new political party would find themselves. I don't use that as a pejorative. Just in the flurry of trying to get a flipping election campaign running with little time and trying to get candidates together and hoping you've got the right people, and maybe there was a practical reason for it. Georgina, down in London. Back to gender. Georgina, what are your thoughts? Hello.
Well, to be honest with you, good afternoon, Ian, first of all. I just want to say, I think this world has gone totally mad when we have a Prime Minister who doesn't know that there is only male and female. This actually shocks me. I have 5 beautiful children ranging from the ages of 42 to the age of 16. And I have never...
That's a great big age gap you've got there, isn't it? Fantastic.
Well, it was a bit of a surprise, but you know what?
I'm sure.
It was all wonderful.
It just means you put off retirement a little bit, don't you, for that?
A little bit. But when my children were born, if the little one had a tig-leg, it was a boy, and if it had a foo-foo, it was a little girl. And I've been lucky enough to get both. So, you know, but I've never had anyone say to me, oh, well, we don't know what gender it is yet, because I would have been most upset about that.
Well, you get the sort of the Americanized kind of, you know, we're going to let the baby pick its own gender. So, well, you can't really do that. I mean,
why?
You know, that's just not a thing.
But, Ian, we are pandering to these people. We are pandering to them. And the more that we pander to this silly
ideology of, you can be a cat, you can be a dog, you can be a llama, you can be a boy if you're a girl, or a girl if you're a boy. How do they go about biology lessons in school? How do they go about reproductive biology lessons with children? I don't understand, and bear in mind, they're doing that now at a very early age, reproductive lessons. I'm just making bacon, you'll have to bear with me, I'm doing sandwiches. So I really don't understand what they are saying to our children in school when they are so mixed up with gender in general. The world has gone crazy.
Yeah. Did you say cooking bacon or making bacon?
No, well, it is farmed, fresh farmed bacon.
If you're making bacon, that might involve kind of live pig slaughter, which I think breaks the off-on.
No slaughter in this house, my darling, no slaughter.
Right.
I'm just making bacon sandwiches for my son.
Like it. Listen, Georgina, thank you very much indeed for that. There's never a wrong time of day to make a bacon sandwich. If you look at the cross-section of pig, I think the gender story is rather interesting. It's never going to be lost on me, as I was saying in the last hour, that this was never a remarkable subject in particular. Sometimes you might get a documentary on somebody who has changed their birth gender and decided to live life as a man or a woman. I can remember Faye Presto. Faye Presto is a very, very gifted table magician. I think used to work out of the Ivy down in Covent Garden years ago. There was a documentary on Faye Presto, and I remember Faye coming on James Whale's show. I had a bit of a row with Whale. That's not unusual, of course, back in the day. And then there was, I mentioned Nadia from Big Brother and a few others that have been trans people who've gained a certain profile. But there was never really any, if any at all, debate about the gender change itself. There was a question of, that's an interesting story. Yeah, some people are just born in the wrong body. Used to be how it was said, and most people left it at that. What has been responsible for, what has changed in all of this is firstly the word non-binary, which has just been thrown in as a way that people can identify themselves. Certainly we've got a greater cohort of people who now say, I was born in the wrong body. Now, some would say, well, that's a good thing that people are more confident that there are resources to help them with that. You couldn't remove the mental health element to this story either, which is almost, not exclusively, but almost seems to be a factor in body dysmorphia and all that goes with it. And there's no criticism here, but I think you'd have to be a bit daft if you didn't say, some form of mental health stroke issue, sometimes breakdown, whatever it happens to be, not knowing your identity as a young person or not being is not unusual. But if you've got people encouraging you, you've got young gay kids who might be 14, 15 saying, and then somebody else wants to recategorize, well, you might not be gay, you might be a girl. It's like, well, no, I'm a boy. No, but you might be a girl. If you fancy boys, you might actually be a girl. Well, probably not, but, I'm open to all suggestions, etc. So it's kind of just gone mad. It's gone into a funny territory. And it was never there before. It was never there before. I've mentioned India Willoughby, who is, now kind of for some reason decided, despite never saying anything unkind about India or other trans people for that matter, has decided that I, along with others, are responsible for the deaths of people. But India, who was, very straight-laced and very good on these subjects, and by the way, the first time I interviewed India, I had no idea that India was a trans woman. I didn't know at all. I had no idea whatsoever. And then, for my money and in my own personal opinion, took a very different turn in the way that they view certain subjects or issues. And, politics went from right to very much on the left in this thing. And then, as far as I can see, started saying and tweeting some really kind of bonkers stuff. And that's kind of strange. But when I first interviewed India, when I was here at Talk, when I was first, I think I was covering for Eamon Holmes or something, or was it Matthew? Either way, and India was in. I didn't know that India was trans, and I just did the interview. And even when I sort of found out, I thought, oh, right, okay. And it was never, that bit was never referenced, is the point. It was never referenced, which I thought is how it's meant to be. The people responsible for it getting referenced are all the kind of loons out there that say there's 115 genders. And by the way, the story of the train company sending out the apology for using the term ladies and gentlemen, I remember that day when we broke that news, India phoning in and joining in with my incredulity and annoyance of the madness of all of this. So, yeah, a complete reverse ferret on India's part. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. We'll have more calls from you on this and the other big stories of the day as well. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Talk 25 to 3 now. Let's look at this story. Gun sellers will have to alert police before handing over firearms after a teenage murderer's plot for the deadliest school shooting in history. Now, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, is set to overhaul gun laws to close what she said was a deep and long-standing weakness in private arms sales. 19-year-old Nicholas Prosper was yesterday jailed for life with at least 49 years behind bars after he killed his mum and two siblings with an illegal gun before being caught on his way to attack his old primary school. In a moment, we'll speak to the solicitor, Abu Qibla. But first, Peter Squires, Professor of Criminology and member of the Gun Control Network. Peter, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
I'm always kind of tempted to, when we have these debates about gun control, knife control, whatever it happens to be in this case, guns, to really sort of override it all by saying, look, if somebody is determined to get a gun, whatever the rules of the land are, they will get a gun.
That's possibly true. I mean, you can always find a knife. You only have to go to your kitchen drawer for a knife. Guns are a lot harder to get. We've squeezed down the supply pretty effectively. We're at a 20-year low in gun crime in this country, and that's been a progressive tightening of loopholes. You'll have seen something only last week about banning 3D printer files, and then we were banning convertible blank firers, and now we're tightening up licensing. This, however, has been a kind of pretty blatant loophole for some time. The idea that in a safe country, a sane country, you should be okay buying a gun in a car park from a bloke you've never met before, overseen by nobody, has always been an accident waiting to happen.
And that would be already illegal, right? What happened there?
Well, yes, because he had a fraudulently produced certificate that he'd downloaded off the web and falsified. You probably used some AI to kind of make it look realistic and then forge a signature. But that's another aspect too. The gun legislation in this country stems from 1968. There's been an awful lot of technological change since then, and really the law has been outrun by the technology. But the problem that if you have a license, irrespective of the fact that this was a false one, if you have a license, it shouldn't be a kind of golden ticket to buy any other shotgun at any time and accumulate as many as you like. But that is how it has been. And that's always a rather insecure basis for enabling firearm transactions.
In terms of new rules, an overhaul of the gun laws Yvette Cooper is talking about, I mean, what's the first thing she needs to do?
Well, the first thing she said she's going to do is to require people wanting to sell guns on a private basis to let the police know in advance so that they have got time to make any kind of license checks or criminal records checks that they might need to. They'll have to stipulate what they're selling and who they're selling it to. Currently, the seller of a gun in a car park doesn't have to let the police know for a week. And of course, that's a long time for accidents to happen.
Yeah, and I would imagine quite a lot of guns that are sold in car parks or similar places, no one ever gets to know about it. There's no information passed on at all.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to your first question. If you are really, really determined, criminals can find a way. Criminals break laws. So passing new laws will not totally end the problem, but we have progressively sought to close the loopholes that exist.
Indeed. Peter, thank you for your time. Peter Squires, Professor of Criminology, member of the Gun Control Network. Abu Qibla is Managing Director at Stuart Miller Solicitors. Abu, good afternoon to you. So nice to have you with us. I know that your company had clients in this area. Just to go back to the last point that we raised there with Peter, look, determined criminal, somebody wants a gun, will get a gun if they're hell-bent on doing so.
Absolutely. I think what many people don't realise is that it is very, very easy to get a gun. Yeah. We've seen it from people, young kids under the age of 18 to adults. If you want to get a firearm, it is very easy to get one.
And the government surely know this, don't they? I mean, I appreciate that Home Secretaries have to step up to the plate when things like this happen and say, oh, no, we're going to change this, we're going to change that. But, a truly intentioned criminal, as you rightly say, will either go online or they'll know somebody in the local pub or they'll find, there's as you say, it's frighteningly easy to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, the government will know about this, even from police statistics, in terms of what they see within the court system over the past years. Now, if somebody really wants to get one, they can do. So jumping on the bandwagon because you've heard, or obviously a very tragic incident has taken place, doesn't really make a lot of sense, only because what we're talking about in that instance is somebody who's created a fraudulent license, gone to buy a firearm secondhand from somebody who's unsuspecting. Remember, this gentleman the person he bought it from has been cleared of any wrongdoing because he's just followed the law. He's looked at the license, but of course he's not, he hasn't got the qualifications to see whether that license itself is something which is legitimate.
Yeah. Is there not, I mean, I appreciate, we live in a free country and where somebody carries out a transaction is not usually dictated to by the state. But if anybody is trying to buy a gun in a car park, isn't that in itself a bit fishy?
Absolutely, I agree with you. And it's from the professor who was on just before me. The laws are archaic. I mean, what they should have in that respect is if somebody wants to sell a firearm which they're legally entitled to, then it has to be regulated. So either you go somewhere, you speak to somebody, just like many things within this country. But the whole concept, as you quite rightly say, buying a firearm in a car park is absolutely wild.
And if you turn up and the person buying it, clearly is a teenager, then that would, you might think, arouse your suspicions. I know in this particular case, the person had no case to answer. He'd done nothing wrong. in the eyes of the law. But, you know, from on a human level, you might think it's a bit weird. I'm in a car park and a teenager wants a gun.
I think you and me would agree on this. I mean, certainly if you and I were in a car park selling a legitimate firearm and we saw a teenager there, I think on the moral question we would say, and I think many people in this country would do the same thing, say, well, actually, what's going on here? I'm not selling you this. So it's a good point, but on this occasion I can't comment for.
No, that's fair enough. And I mean, just on that point of gun crime, I mean, we know that, you know, a lot of focus on knife crime and trying to get blades off the street. Lost count of how many initiatives there are. Bin the blade and goodness knows what else. Metal detectors in schools, and, you know, some levels of success in some areas, but overall there's still a grim picture. We don't hear quite as much about gun crime. I mean, from time to time there are drive-by shootings, and there are stories as the one that we saw culminating yesterday in this life sentence. But in your experience, is gun crime getting worse?
I wouldn't say it was getting worse. It's just something that's always there. And no matter what happens in terms of, you know, trying to legislate for it, or trying to put measures in place, there's always going to be an element of society who's able to get a firearm from somewhere. Remember, a lot of these firearms, they're not actually proper firearms. They are things which are converted, like the Olympic BB gun, for example, which was completely legitimate, but they convert that. You're talking about sawn-off shotguns. We're not talking about, you know, legitimate Glocks or, you know, something from a Smith & Wesson, for example. The legitimate things which somebody would. These are all kind of illegal items. I don't think it's necessarily getting worse. But on the point of legislation, the legislation is quite tough on this area. You know, a lot of the firearms offences are mandatory sentences of 5 years, at least 5 years, you know, going up to double figures. So I don't think it necessarily means legislating. I think just there's a few loopholes that need to be closed.
Yeah. Listen, Abu, thank you for your time, sir. Really appreciate that. Abu Kibla, Managing Director at Stuart Miller Solicitors. Thank you to him. Back to more comment from you. Reference the reform NDAs. David says this still shows that the Nigel Farage treats reform as his private company and not a realistic political party, which is why I have left them and will not vote for them whilst Mr Farage is in charge, says David. Suze says many companies get their employees to sign NDAs. What's the problem? Well, the difference there is that although at the time Reform was a company, not a political party, but to all intents and purposes, it's meant to be a political party. You're meant to reek of transparency. There's no skeletons here. There's nothing to see. What would you possibly need? So the optics for a political party, particularly if that political party is called Reform, are not necessarily as desirable as some would suggest. On guns, Trevor says guns are often bought and sold at county fairs. It's not unusual in the countryside, but could be unusual at an Asda car park in Croydon. Yeah, I mean, the guy that sold the gun to this triple murderer had, in the eyes of the law, done nothing wrong. But you might think, you know, firstly, he wants to meet me in a car park, and secondly, when you turn up, it's quite obviously a teenager standing there. Wouldn't you go, hang on, this is all shades of weird. Don says, as an old cowboy, I can purchase a Colt 45 blank firing Wild West gun with ammunition online. Reputable sellers only ask for confirmation that you are over 18. Huge issues there. Our lines are open. Let's talk to Sean over there in West Yorkshire on firearms. How are you doing, Sean?
Very well, thank you. And
good.
Yourself?
Yeah, very good, thanks. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm an owner of 3 shotguns myself for recreational use and game use, but 2 were purchased by a dealer and 1 was privately. And I completely agree that private sales needs to be some kind of regulation for this very reason. And one of the thoughts I had was using a firearms dealer as a mediator. So if I want to sell one of my guns, I would go to a dealer, I would publicise it on various websites where you can advertise your gun to buy, but you can only sell it via a registered firearm dealer as somebody to oversee the process, and you pay a small fee for that process of them to, I don't know, £10 to countersign the sale.
So the situation as it is should work, but if somebody wants to abuse it, it's open to any kind of abuse, right?
Oh, it is, because all you have to do is various websites that you can go on, and there's a whole plethora of shotguns, rifles, pistols on there that you can advertise for private sale. And as a buyer or seller, you should be then checking on the person's license. But in this case, the license was forgery. But if you could still advertise your gun privately, but you just said to the prospective buyer, "Excellent, you want to buy my license, not my gun. Please meet me at this firearms dealer who can oversee the process." And we're using the facilities and the firearms dealer as a mediator, as it were, for a small fee to help the sale of your gun.
Sean, thank you. Very thorough stuff from Sean in West Yorkshire. More from you on the way. 0344 499 1000. Voice of Doom is on its way. It's day 2. It's a rollover. Stand by for that. But first, time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning those Oasis tickets for Wembley this summer.
How do you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
Has it caused some turbulence? Of course. Has it on the edges caused some people to be disconcerted? Yes. Does it make a fundamental difference to what we're going to do on May the 1st? No. And does it make almost any difference in the country? Virtually none whatsoever. So, you know, obviously members think, well, he was doing some good stuff, he was doing some good work, he was putting out some good tweets. You know, why is this happening to him?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is talk just gone 10 to 3. Back to the calls in just a second. Voice of Doom, day 2. This is the mystery voice with a political vibe to it. Day 2, because it didn't go yesterday. It's a rollover. If you have any idea who the voice is, you can message in. Let's have a listen.
Political decisions were taken.
I think that's quite tricky, right? Don't, whatever you do, pick up the phone and call us, because there is not a prize in the house for this. You might want to message in if you fancy taking part. Here's the voice again.
Political decisions were taken.
87222 if you know who that is. If we get a correct answer in the next 10 minutes or so, we will reveal all after the news headlines. We'll do that, but if we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here it is again.
Political decisions were taken.
87222. Lisa says, I applied, this is reference to gender madness, where did it all come from? I applied for a role with a large pharmacy and was confronted with this. No idea what most of these are. And here they are. So this was a kind of a drop-down menu where you select your gender. Allosexual. Is that just like a kind of a Danny allosexual? Is that what that is? You just have a proclivity for sort of Cockney meetups or something. Maybe it's that. Androsexual. I have no idea. Asexual, I know what that is. Bisexual, gay, heterosexual, lesbian, pansexual, scoliosexual, with a K, scoliosexual. Other, or prefer not to say. After that old list, I think you might favour the prefer not to... If they're the kind of, like, questions they're asking you over there at the pharmacy, you might be better not answering that at all. I did look up scoliosexual, and apparently it says here that it's a relatively new term, so being scoliosexual means different things to different people, which tells you what a kind of nonsense this all is. Some consider scoliosexual to be an attraction to anyone who is not cisgender, and cisgender is an invented term for heterosexual, I think. There it is. Adam in Nottingham. Adam, what are you thinking? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Yes. No, it was earlier you had this wonderful guest star said something along the lines of just stop talking about it, because there's this wonderful interview with not you, you know, I know who you do, but there's this wonderful interview with Morgan Freeman when he was on about racist Black history.
I remember this.
But,
yeah.
Yes. It's like how would you battle racism? Yeah. You stop talking about it. Stop giving it the momentum it needs, because, all the laws are there. You just need the people to enforce them. So if you go and hit someone for being gay or whatever, you should go to jail and there shouldn't be no messing about.
100%.
Just stop talking about it. Stop. Yep. All of this is just building up, and it builds up because it's all on social media. And it's all the kids are saying, and it gives, there's a whole culture around it now. Yep. And it's just gone insane. That's my thought on it. I have no idea if anyone shares that.
No, I think you're absolutely spot on. I just wonder, yes, it would work. I think if these discussions never saw the light of day, then maybe it would work. But I do wonder whether sort of big corporations and like the one I just read out that are asking all about your gender and they've sort of invented gender to go with it, whether it would make any difference.
Someone's always making money off of it, and someone's always making moves off of whatever this is.
That's true.
It's facts of life. Yeah. The fact it has this momentum is it feeds so many mouths within that industry, and the media can keep it going as well. But it's never been a problem. I don't want to be that guy who says I got a gay friend. I got a varied pool of different friends. Yeah. I've never treated anyone differently. The only thing I only ever say is if you're to me, then then that's who you are, and it doesn't matter what colour, what sex, whatever you are.
Correct.
It's as simple as that, and it's just everything else is just nonsense and a waste of time. There's a lot more bigger things going off in the world.
Just a bit.
If this thing happens with whatever, if this happens, there will be no feminism. This argument will not exist. We'll be fine for our lives.
Yeah. Spot on. Listen, great call. Sean, thank you for that. Paul is in Newport on this story. Paul, what are your thoughts?
It dawned upon me, listen to the thing about, so you could be stood there with a full beard and the policeman says your name and you say, I'm Miss Smith, and there's nothing you can do. I can remember back in like the mid-90s, I'd have been in heavy industry then, and they were all welders and, heavy press operators, people with forearms like my legs sort of thing.
Yes.
And there was a change, okay, when all of a sudden it wasn't what you said, it was how the person interpreted it. So if I'd said to you, leave it out here and you muppet, I would get hauled up in front of personnel because you'd say, well, no, I felt threatened. And he called me a muppet and I felt insulted. And all of a sudden, it didn't matter how... You just jovial. I hate the word banter because it's been bastardised, but it was just normal. Everyone was a muppet. If you didn't get called a muppet 3 times a day, you didn't have any friends, really, did you?
That's very true.
All of a sudden, it wasn't what you get. You could have said it in the most jokey, jovial way, but if they said, "I feel offended," you're in the office. You're up against the boss is saying you've upset him. And
you're on. Yes, and this is based on somebody saying, "I feel offended."
Yeah. You've done me a disservice, or you've made me feel less of a human, or whatever. But I mean, I'm going back to like the probably early '90s. It almost seemed to happen overnight. One minute you could sort of like just have a good just say you just spoke, really, the usual vernacular of a factory.
Yeah.
And the next minute it wasn't what you said; it was how they interpreted.
How somebody interpreted.
You were wrong.
Spot on, Paul. Great. You make a great call. Listen, we hit the clock. Thank you for that, Paul in Newport. Lots to come in the next section as well. Oh, by the way, Tim in St Ives, second person from a similar industry. So I used to design forms for an organisation some years ago, and we changed from using the word sex to gender only because quite often people were putting yes, please on the answer to sex, of course, as an answer instead of male or female. So it was a practical thing and the terms were interchangeable. I get it. Tim, thank you very much indeed for that. We'll have more comment from you on the way. What is behind the gender madness? The root cause, the history of it. Where did it all kind of begin? They unleashed this cacophony of confusion, pronouns and insistence on X, Y and Z and things. And the voice of doom. Will we get a winner? Here's the voice.
Political decisions were taken.
Think you know, don't call, but you can message 87222. Right now, news.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Welcome back. 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. As you've been hearing, criminals, even rapists, are free to pick their own gender, with the government refusing to force the police and courts to record biological sex. You might think there are some areas where that would be really important. If you change your sex, if that is how you describe it, then it might be good that you still get the medical letters saying you need a prostate test or you need a smear test from the hospital. If everything's been changed on the database, that won't happen. Also this afternoon, the mad dash to net zero risks crashing Britain's economy, with the poorest in society to bear the burden, according to a leaked government document. We'll talk to Donica McCarthy about this in just a few moments. And Donald Trump has offered to take over Ukraine's power plant. He's going to take over another country. He's got Greenland, he's got Canada, and now Ukraine's power plants for protection, after he and Zelensky had a frank and positive call with the White House saying peace has never been closer. Well, certainly on that last point, we hope that to be true. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Let's look at the voice of doom before the news, of course. This is the mystery voice bit with a political vibe. Could be a politician, could be somebody connected to politics in some kind of way. Have a listen to the voice we played you.
Political decisions were taken.
These are some of the answers. David Cameron, no. I can kind of see why some people thought that. Kit Malthouse, it isn't. George Osborne, definitely not. Peter Hain, no. In fact, we haven't got a right answer. It's another rollover, kids. Tomorrow, around about 2:45, the Voice of Doom is back for day 3. Stand by for that. Now, a leaked government report has revealed the push for net zero could shrink the UK's economy by 10% by the end of the decade and even trigger a financial crash. It warns that poor planning for going carbon neutral by 2050 could mess up the markets, with big drops in asset values affecting businesses here and abroad. Experts say it'll be the poorest, because it usually is, who will end up paying the price. Do we really need to be on such a strict target for this 2050 thing? What is the evangelical approach to this all about? Let's speak to one man who I think I can safely say is certainly behind the 2050 target and arguably would like it sooner. Donica McCarthy, Director of the Climate Media Coalition. Donica, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. So you had this grand idea, net zero, wouldn't it be? But now we've found out we're all going to be skint, we'll be homeless, freezing cold, nothing to eat our homes. So time for a rethink, apparently, Donica. You got it all wrong all these years.
Yeah, OK. Well, the Sun has found an old report from the Department of Business, and they've put 2 and 2 and got -10. Look, environmentalists have been warning about asset management stranded for years. It's a really technical term. What does it mean? It means if there's a sudden regulation or cost differential applies to fossil fuel investments, they could be stranded, and the people who own the fossil fuel investments could actually suffer large amounts of loss of income. We have warned this for years, and thankfully in the UK we are taking steps to avoid that. How have we done that? We've done it in 2 ways. First of all, we've gradually closed down our coal plants, so we're not at risk of them going suddenly bankrupt. And the government is saying we shouldn't be investing in new offshore North Sea oil and gas, because they too could become stranded assets. So Britain has actually taken action on that. What this report refers to is if governments don't take action to protect themselves from their fossil fuels going bankrupt, that could affect the global economy, and that could affect Britain. So that's what the report's about. But where the report is correct is that we should make sure that poor people are not paying, are helped through the process of the green transition. And there are 3 ways we should be doing that. First of all, we should abandon this poll tax on outstanding charges on poor people's electricity bills. Secondly, we must remove the Tory tax, the Tory green, insane green tax on green energy. And thirdly, we should actually have a social bans, where the less electricity you use, the less you pay.
Yeah, it's actually the Labour green tax now, of course, because you might have noticed they won an election and haven't got rid of it.
Yeah, I agree. I'm saying the Labour government should get rid of the Tory tax.
It's interesting to hear you say it, Donica, because most people on your side, if that is the right way to define it, of the argument, actually usually support the green element. I know it's not that's making bills particularly expensive, but it doesn't help, right?
I mean, I would like to see it removed, because I actually think taxing green energy is insane. But you make a major point there as well, which actually has been all over the press, and in Kemi Badenoch's speech the other day, which is the media keeps saying, the right-wing media keeps saying that UK electricity prices are very high because of green energy. That is simply not true. The average UK price, we have the highest electricity prices, and the reason for that, Ian, is that our electricity is linked to fossil gas electricity price 98% of the time. In the rest of Europe, on average, it's 40% of the time, and that means that high price of fossil fuels after the Ukraine invasion is hammering the UK economy, is hammering UK consumers. What we should be doing is decouple the electricity price from fossil gas and allow consumers at home to benefit from the cheap green electricity that's now beginning to come in.
And I think I'm right in saying, Donica, that they take the most expensive point of the day. Is that right? Wherever the fossil fuel is at its most expensive, sets the price for us, which is
absolutely insane.
But other European countries don't do this.
They do it 40% of the time, and we do it 98% of the time.
Do we know the reason for that? Because we would all agree that's insane.
Yeah, good question. I find the UK market so complex as even does my brain in. I think it's to make sure that the fossil fuel companies make sufficient profit when the prices go high, because they have to cover the problem with fossil fuel power stations is they have to constantly buy gas. Whereas actually renewable energy whether it's solar or wind, they do not have to pay for the fuel. And when fuel costs soar, they have to have a system in place to compensate them for that.
OK, we're about 500 years away from being able to energise our homes with windmills and solar panels, aren't we, Donica? So, what's the 2050 thing? And heat pumps, of course, we can all agree they're a nonsense. So electric cars are only half invented, really. So we've got a problem here, haven't we?
Well, you say electric cars are invented, but they're the ones that actually...
Half invented.
That the drivers are switching to already. The running costs of electric vehicles over its lifetime is cheaper. The problem with EVs in the UK is that most poorer people do not buy new cars. They buy second-hand cars. And so we're waiting really for the first tranche of EVs to come through the market to enable poorer drivers to benefit from the cheaper costs of EVs. But as regards what's the other point, heat pumps, yes, heat pumps are expensive. I haven't gone down that route for my house. I've gone down the route infrared panels, which I find are much cheaper to install and cheaper to run. And I run them off the solar panels of my house. So that is where... And as regards the UK grid, Ian, people forget... We've already got rid of a significant majority of the fossil fuels off our grid. Last year, the fossil fuels only provided 28% of the electricity in the UK. It is not beyond the bounds of this intelligent, rich country to get rid of that last 28% over the next 6 years.
It's not all wind farms, though, providing the rest.
No, it's wind is 30. Hang on, wind is around. I think the last time I read is over 30%. Solar is around 6%, and hydro is around 2%. So renewables together are around 37%, but fossil fuels is only 28% now. Yeah. It's amazing how fast we've made progress. And the other thing that they always go on about is that it'll ruin the economy. It'll ruin the economy. We have reduced our carbon emissions by 50% since 1990, and our GDP is 150% bigger. So we are cleaner and richer over the last...
So the point I think many people are concerned about, though, Donica, is that, what you've just said is right, which is, you've got those ULEZ cameras that, literally the most ridiculous waste of money on planet Earth. I can't believe Sadiq Khan isn't in jail just based on that, because you just articulated it brilliantly. And that is, there is a natural organic process where things change. the ULEZ thing was, designed apparently to pick up, certainly the extension of it, 9% of motorists, which by in the next couple of years would naturally be down to about 4%. So it was going that way anyway. You didn't need to spend 300 million quid of taxpayers' money, which is criminal, to achieve something that's going to be achieved just by the natural course of events.
Hang on a sec, Ian. We have reduced our fossil fuel use down to 28% by government regulation and actually investment 15 years ago. 15 years ago, the Farages and the Badnocks were right. Green energy was more expensive. And for the first 5 to 10 years, the government invested and subsidized green electricity. And that got us to a stage where it is now cheaper to produce because like any other market, when you mass produce it. But the other important thing is when you put regulations in place, you give the market certainty. And that's why the CBI condemned Badenoch's speech this week. The CBI said that the largest source of economic growth in the United Kingdom last year came from the green economy. They said there's 1 million jobs, Ian, 1 million jobs already in the green economy. And the other extraordinary thing about it is they're saying those green jobs, on average, are paid £5,000 more than the average job in the wider economy.
What are the million green jobs? I'm not expecting you to name every one of them. That would be curious. But I don't really know anybody or hear of many people who work in all these new green industries, unless you're talking about, I don't know, somebody who's done a bit of greenwashing and decided to relabel themselves as being a bit environmentally friendly.
Well, the industries that are, I'll try and tick off some of them. The solar panel installation industry employs 20 to 30,000 people. The offshore wind industry, the onshore industry, the insulation industry, the EV battery industry, the EV industry. All across Britain, the reindustrialisation of Britain and the retooling of Britain is actually providing an extraordinary number of jobs. And the other positive thing about it is it's rebalancing the economy. Because, as you know, most of the huge amount of the economic engine of Britain is based in London. The extraordinary thing about these jobs is that across the Humber, the North East, Scotland and Wales, is that there are thousands of new well-paying jobs replacing the old fossil fuel economy, and there are better jobs for them.
Do you sense that Mr. Miliband needs to calm the hell down, though, Donica? Because, there is a very real belief that maybe he's not the man for the job anymore. He's nipped over to China on a big old gas-guzzling aeroplane, could have done it on Zoom, but decided that apparently that's not the right thing to do. And there's a credibility issue here, isn't there? Does it not want somebody more sane to sell these arguments?
I'm not going to... I think I'm not going to talk the sanity of Miliband, but actually some of his policies might make total sense. There is actually a couple I do disagree with, and actually again, they're hangover Tory policies. There is, look, in any endeavour by any government, there will be good policies and bad policies. There'll be money well spent and there'll be money wasted. Where is money being wasted on the net zero, on the green transition? It's in two areas. And interestingly, it's the areas that Farage and Badenoch want us to focus on. They want us to focus on fossil fuels and they want us to focus on nuclear. And whilst the government's wasting money on, they're giving something like 20 billion, Ian, to the oil companies to capture the carbon off a new fossil fuel plant, I think in Hull. And the other area they want us to spend money is because the private sector is extraordinary. They are funding most of the green transition. But where they won't fund it, they won't fund carbon capture and they won't fund nuclear. Why? Because they are economically insane. The spending something like £45 billion on a new experimental nuclear power plant in Sizewell is just insane. So
But the thing is, but Donica, you raised the figures at the beginning that but fossil fuels are still mostly used to fuel and energise this country by a majority. So given that...
No, Ian, that's not what I said. I said it's 28% of our national grid is supplied by fossil fuels, 28% just.
So energy consumption 2022... Oil 36%, gas 39%. I mean, those figures are higher than the ones you're quoting there. And that's the last time we've got figures for the whole year. You might be quoting part of a year, but
I'm talking about 2024.
Well, 2022, in 2024, they released the 2022 figures, which were...
Well, my understanding is that it was 28%. Anyway, it's a minority, definitely, whatever the exact figure is, whether it's 22...
But between oil, gas, nuclear... bioenergy, waste, that kind of thing, hydro, that is far outweighing wind and solar, right?
Yeah, I said renewables are 37%, fossil fuels are around 28%. Then you've got hydro, and then you've got nuclear. But actually, nuclear is the most expensive, like a new energy you could possibly invest. And Ed Miliband's going down that route. I don't know why. That's insane. He's also going down. Also, carbon capture electricity is one of the most expensive. So what we should be doing is going down renewables, not renewables. We should go down storage. And we should be going down the route green hydro, so we have interseasonal storage. So we don't waste £1 billion every year on turning off wind turbines.
OK, listen, always good to talk. Donica, thank you. Donica McCarthy, he is the director of the Climate Media Coalition. You heard what he said. Do you agree? I think there is a problem with selective data. Certainly, the last data that I was able to look at on that point was that oil and gas, well, in fact, 2022. He says he was taking 2024 figures. I don't know which part of the year, whether it was the whole year, but certainly when I looked at this, the amount of what you would call fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas, were responsible for about 78% of our usage. It is down from 2012, where it was 87%, but we are still predominantly using fossil-based fuels. Now, great idea to get rid of the dirty stuff and get some nice clean windmills going and some shiny panels on our roofs. If you can do that, fantastic. Who doesn't want to clean a place? But you've got to do it realistically. You don't want to close stuff down if the other stuff isn't yet ready or can't provide the full extent of its requirements. Just saying. 0344 499 1000.
Here's the thing, he says, Farage is incapable of saving the UK. In office, he would do massive damage. We love our country. We'll fight on. Are you incapable of saving the UK, and would you do massive damage in office?
Is this the same Ben Habib who lost election after election? Is this the same Ben Habib who, when he was deputy leader of the party, failed to get any of the candidates vetted, which caused us such problems at the general election, and failed to get us to stand in more than 12% of seats last year? Is that the same fella?
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Reference the gender issue as well. This comes from Kev the Red, who says the simplest solution on forms, data collection and the like, as a change from the question of sex or gender is, at birth, were you male or female? No other option available, and a warning that failure to answer correctly will result in cancellation, disciplinary action or criminal prosecution. Sorted. Well, it is, you say that, Kev, and I would agree with you 100%, but you are underestimating the evangelical nature of the gender industry, which is that you never, ever, ever dare to reference the person's previous identified gender, i.e. the one they were born with, because that's not something, or that's not the person they are now. They're a completely different person. That person never technically existed. They were always, they would argue, born male or female. In any case, so, yeah, I mean, it's meant to be this messed up, I think. A little bit of breaking news for those who are following the events of Just Stop Oil. 9 Just Stop Oil protesters have been convicted after the Met Police thwarted their plan to glue themselves onto Heathrow runways. You may remember that from July last year. They are due to be sentenced in May. That is the latest. Tony is in Malden. On net zero, Tony, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. We seem to talk quite a lot, me and you, because it's the third time I've actually got through to you.
I feel like you're my neighbour on these days, Tony. Over the fence.
Your programmes are very informative.
Thank you. Very kind.
What I'd like to say on this net zero malarkey, and I don't think it's malarkey, is we keep pushing out this thing about we're going to be self-sufficient. Keir Starmer loves to push it. We're going to be self-sufficient and we're going to be out there selling our technology to the world. OK, that's fair enough. I love all that. Mm-hmm. But tell me, where do the bits come from for us to produce this net zero? Where do the panels come from? The heat pumps and all that. Where are they made? They're made in China. What makes us self-sufficient if we're not producing that stuff, so that we don't have to have any of these panels or any of the heat pumps and so forth from China? The other thing I'd like to mention is the environmental issues with these, the lithium, the cobalt. There's countries throughout the African states that are swimming in sewerage produced by lithium and cobalt. Lands are being destroyed by this, but we never hear any of this. We never hear them tell us what's going to happen with the windmills whenever they come to the end of their life.
Which I think is a fair question, isn't it, to ask?
I think so, Ian, because if everything has a cost, you can't go pushing zero this and zero that down our throats, while at the same time expecting us then to pick up the bill to clean up Africa or clean up the stuff that we can't do anything, we can't recycle it. And the electric cars are the classic example, because we'll never ever be able to produce enough electricity to run everybody's electric car. Yeah, and I don't know if you can remember, just recently there was a thing about AI. If the AI plants are going to be opened up all over this country, all switched on at the same time, you and me wouldn't be able to boil a kettle.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That doesn't come up often enough, to be honest, does it, Tony? The fact that, you know, if everybody had an electric car today, I don't know what percentage of people have an electric car. Is it 10% or something? 15? I don't know, but it's low. It's not the most. It's not most people. So, yeah, that would be a genuine problem for the grid.
How do we square the circle? Because you can't have your cake today, but you've got to pay for it somewhere down the line.
Yeah.
I always say to people, if you can think of infinity, then think of that the same way you think about electrification of this country. It's impossible, and you'll never ever get to the end of it. You'll never be able to think about the end result.
Got it.
is impossible.
It's impossible to imagine that scenario at its full pelt working. Listen, great call, Tony. Thank you for that. Dan in Tunbridge says the last message you read out about people putting yes please on forms when asked for their sex is what makes me proud to be British. The same place Boaty McBoatface came from. That's a very good point, isn't it? I wonder if any other country in the world, when they see those forms, whether you're Italian, whether you're German, whatever, sex, male or first, and somebody writes yes please next to it, is that just a peculiarly British? I'd like to think it's just us lot that find that kind of carry-on humour funny. That's quite a fascinating debate to follow, isn't it? Where does that come from? Why is it in our culture? Carry-on films as a kid were the most hilarious things I had ever seen, along with Benny Hill and Dick Emery. And you wouldn't put much of that stuff on the TV these days. Both of those men, by the way, were absolutely genius comedic performers, and they were of their time. But you look back at some of that stuff. Benny Hill was taken off TV when it was something, he had something like 20 million weekly viewers on his TV show, and they removed it from the telly. Now, can you think of a programme today that would get 20 million viewers and they would go, we've got to get rid of that. We don't like the cut of his jib. I very much doubt it. And that was back in, when was Benny Hill revealed? Probably in the 80s or something, maybe the 90s. And he died not long after that, really, relatively speaking, because his career was done. He lived in a normal house in Southampton as well, which was quite curious for a multi-millionaire. Charlie in East Sussex. How you doing, Charlie?
I'm very well, Ian, as usual.
Good.
That guy you get on, that Donald, he absolutely, honestly, he absolutely does my brain in.
Yeah.
Do you know we import over 12 terawatts of power every month? We generate, our nuclear capacity to generate is only 10 terawatts. So we're importing so much energy, and he's got the nerve to come on there and thinking everything's absolutely fantastic.
So when he says talks about the amount of green energy we're using, he's not talking about necessarily energy that came from this country.
No, because we're importing 12 terawatts of energy every month. It's costing billions and billions of pounds a year to put this in, to bring this in.
Wow.
And we're paying for it. And I don't know why anybody just doesn't actually have the kahunas to stand up and say, why is this happening? Why are we importing all of this?
Yeah.
Why have we no energy security? What have we done? What do we need to do? No one says any of this. It's so frustrating. And I'm driving along in my electric car, by the way, and
you're doing your bit.
I'm thinking to myself, well, no, I'm only driving an electric car because it's cheaper on tax, And
at the moment,
Sadiq Khan doesn't charge me anything.
Yeah, true.
So why are we importing so much? If it's so good, if renewables are so good, why are we importing so much?
Because we can't produce it ourselves, which is the obvious answer, right? Listen, Charlie, great call. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the electric superhighway that you are experiencing at the moment. I'm assuming the stuff we import is not the renewable stuff, because you can't really store that stuff and sell it on, can you? But we're not anywhere near some kind of neutral or net zero target yet. And even if we were, as many of you have said, because I think we all, I'm going to say it for the umpteenth time, we all agree. Wouldn't it be great if you could fuel an entire nation on windmills? It'd be brilliant, because ultimately, once you pay for the infrastructure, it's like free, right? Free energy. It's just the wind and a bit of sunshine. Well, nobody has to pay for that. So you've got the panels in place, you've got the windmills in their place. It's free. It's literally free. After you've paid the £10 trillion to build it and the people that are paid to work on it, and then paid it again when you have to recycle them. But all of that aside, it is, in theory, it's free energy and it's cleaner. And yet, we'd all love a bit of that. Is it possible? Can it be realised? This from Simon in Swansea. As a 43-year-old male, it's pretty tough to qualify for a world major marathon. as the times required are pretty hard to obtain. Men's qualifying times are much lower than female qualifying times, but if you're non-binary male, then the times are equal to the females. Guess what I'm identifying as from now on? It's literally as simple as that. Yeah, I'm non-binary. I'm not trans, I'm non-binary. Okay, so you can go for the... You're in. We're going to cross live to Washington, D.C. Our friend Michael Graham, the man who regularly helps us out with US-based stories, is back with us, particularly that comment of Donald Trump offering to run the power over there in Ukraine. Clever idea, Donald. Can it work? And is he serious? Details coming next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Trevor, who says, what annoys me about all of this is that one day common sense will return to parts of the government, such as critical things like sex, as in gender, by the way, not like having, not that. But what will not happen is the person who actually signed off on this will never be named, and they will keep their inflated pension. We need to hear names who think up this madness rather than just the institutions. So, well, I always make this point that whenever you see one of these absolutely crazy stories where gender or some other just mad DEI or some just bizarre, wokey policy has been implemented, it starts off with a person going into work saying, hi, everybody, I've got a good idea. And you'd think the rest of the room would go, hey, Joe, that ain't a good idea. That's a terrible idea. That doesn't happen. They all go, do you know what? The man's a genius. Give him a pay rise. Implement the idea. Then you go to the real world and you say, is that a good idea? And literally everybody goes, no, that's a terrible idea. Yeah, but Joe, we never find out who Joe was. It's a whole industry out there. There is a country, of course, that are trying to address a lot of this nonsense, of course, and that is the United States, for which is there we now cross. Donald Trump has offered to take over Ukraine's power plants to protect them from the Russians, following a frank and positive call with Zelensky. The US president said American ownership of the plants will provide the best defense in their first conversation since that Oval Office clash. Get out! The move is expected to anger Putin, who recently demanded an end to US support for Kyiv. Let's speak to Michael Graham, US political commentator, managing editor at Inside Sources. Afternoon to you, Michael. I mean, this is classic Trump playbook stuff, isn't it? What about if we run your energy along with the minerals?
So according to the reporting the last couple of hours, President Zelensky says that they only discussed this one plant, the nuclear plant that's currently in the territory that Russia controls. Now, I think this is brilliant. What Zelensky should do right now is hand Trump the deed for a casino and towering hotel that he can build, but it has to be in the territory Putin has right now. Trump will get rid of that guy in no time. It'll be, if he has a chance to build another Trump Tower casino and all-you-can-eat buffet, that's Donald Trump. You're talking Donald Trump's language.
So he's got, I mean, there's a couple of countries. America's got a lot bigger since Jan 20th. It's got there's a bit of Greenland in there, Canada potentially, Gaza is going to be there, and now possibly Ukraine. Look, on a serious point, Michael, I mean, this is the way Trump operates, right? I mean, he might not get the power plants, but it's a great tactic.
Well, I mean, so, you know, his message to America is that we have let ideals drag us into bad wars, you know, spending billions of dollars, losing lives. And that's how he views the war against terror and the way he was prosecuted in Afghanistan and Iraq. I don't agree, but that's his pitch. And so he says, let's set aside the ideas. Let's talk about interests. How is it in America's interest? Yeah. So a lot of people in the West want America to be more aggressive with our military presence in Greenland, which we actually had and then withdrew over the past, decade or so, as I recall. They like to see America back because it's a way to put pressure on Russia and China. Instead of saying we should do this for the arsenal of democracy, Trump says we'll do it for all that mineral rights you've got that we need to make our cell phones work. And so this is the same thing with Ukraine. You can argue if it's a good or bad, approach, but I don't think anyone should be surprised that Trump's approach is extremely the old school word is mercantile, basically where you're running a country as a business where you are assets. You can call it, direct involvement, but or direct interest, I should say. But, basically, if you put America's skin in the game in Ukraine, then Russia, it theoretically would be deterred. I don't know that they'll be deterred. I think Russia's waiting for some sign that the West writ large, EU, NATO, America, are going to do to him what we could have done all along, which is get very serious about sanctions, ramp up our military, and reverse the pressure on him. I think, would you not agree that right now what's happening between Russia and the West is being driven mostly by Russia, and that they appear to have the leverage, not the West? That's how it looks to me.
Absolutely right. It really does.
And there's no reason for that. I mean, I love the argument that he's a bully, whatever. Ukraine, this tiny little country, not known for its military, expertise, fought the guy to a standstill with our weapons. Russia's clearly weak. If only we had a Reagan who would, flip the leverage so that the financial pressure was coming from us. The pressure on the energy sector was coming from us. Yes, Russia can always sell its oil to China. That's fine. But that's only one vendor out of the world as big as they are. We've got all of the EU and South America and on, so there are ways we could be putting more pressure. That's one place where I think the Biden administration has kind of poisoned the well for more action because they pretended we were acting fully in Ukraine and in Israel. We haven't been acting fully, so now people think, well, there's nothing we can do. We tried and it didn't work. Well, we kind of half tried, I would argue.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about the bit that doesn't get talked about often enough. I mean, if there was an award ceremony for wars, and like an Oscars for the wars going on around the world, and they said, and the award for the country that managed to fight a war with a reasonable level of success despite having literally nothing about it, and no one would have expected them in a million years to win, would have been, and then they'd open the envelope and then Whoopi Goldberg would go, it's the Ukraine. And there you go. So
for Ukraine, I mean, this is their Gone with the Wind performance. This is their, Saving Private Ryan performance. For Trump, for Russia, that's what it is. For Russia, this is basically Ishtar. For Russia, this is Waterworld.
This is Herbie Goes Bananas, Michael.
It didn't really pay off, did it? Yikes.
Spot on. So, I mean, we're in this place. Trump, I think, has orchestrated It is unconventional. We know that. I don't know why people are expecting anything other than that. But has he orchestrated something here that, because everyone was saying, he's weak on, he's weak on Russia and he's sucking up to Russia and he is Putin's poodle. And then suddenly last week he suddenly said, we're going to throw sanctions on those guys like they've never seen in their life. And suddenly oh, hang on a sec. So there is another side to what he's doing here. He ain't taking any nonsense from the Russians.
So one of the most common things I hear from Republicans who don't like Trump is, I don't understand what he talks, because on Russia, he's actually being good. If you look at the policies he implemented when he was in his first term, he's the one who cranked up the pressure while he was simultaneously salivating over the guy. So no one can figure it out. It's similar with China, where he invoked tough sanctions, a trade policy towards China, while saying Xi's a great guy and I can work with him. And so if it is the case that it's not, what was the Teddy Roosevelt, walk softly, carry a big stick? It was kind of like, smile big, but carry a big stick. Yeah. People aren't confident about that stick. Does he really mean it? I don't think he's doing himself any favor with the tariff policy, where with Canada and Mexico, it's on, it's off, we don't know. Steel, yes, no. Aluminum. The more unsteady, the more it feeds into this idea that he doesn't have a plan. Trump has prospered by being very careful. He rarely digs his heels in on things. He's always very mobile. And he gives you so many different answers to the same question. He can always go back and find one that matches what he's doing today. So that's just where we are.
Would Trump have said, do you think, and we will never fully know, to Zelensky, look, here's the thing, Zelensky, I can get you 400 acres in Bermuda. You can be protected for the rest of your life. You'll have the best security around you. You'll have the most lavish, beautiful lifestyle. It'll make Hugh Hefner's mansion look like a flipping high school reunion. It will be like, you will have everything you ever need. Let me do the deal with Vlad, and away we go. I mean, do you think he's for sale, Vladimir?
What do I know? I don't know what's going on in this stuff. I will say that you have to remember that the voters, the people, the will of the people matters. Even in Russia, where they don't want it to matter, where he's an authoritarian. Why is he, driving the economy into the toilet in Russia? He's got to keep the goodies coming for the average citizen. And so he's got two things, the fight of patriotism and government subsidies, because you got to keep the populace happy. My understanding is that the people of Ukraine are not ready to surrender. They are not ready to walk away. They are not done fighting. They want an end, and they're maybe not where they were 2 years ago, but they're not done fighting. It's just this is a problem Democrats are having. Democrats in the United States keep saying, you're supposed to hate what Trump does. Trump is evil. And then we had a new poll out yesterday. Trump is at his highest approval ever of his 2 terms, as president, even as the media is just dumping on him. Look, the American people want the border secure. He's doing it. Is he doing it ugly and dumb sometimes? But he's doing it. The American people think it is frightening that your daughter can be in a locker room and a guy can walk in, and the school administration will say, if anyone complains, they're bad. The guy belongs there. They can't figure that out. Trump is on their side. He just held up $175 million to the University of Pennsylvania, a very prominent university, because they let a guy swim on the girls' team, and they have no apologies. They have no plans on changing their policies. So you can say, Trump ought to tell Ukraine what to do, and Russia ought to tell them, and you ought to tell the American people what to do. But the voice of the people is going to be heard one way or the other.
Yeah. Was it which governor was it that he said at that White House dinner who he challenged it? The
governor of Maine.
Was it a couple of weeks back? Where is the governor? He said, and they had this kind of slight odd. She was off. It was a she, wasn't it? She was off camera.
That's right.
And he was on camera. We are the federal government. He said, and I'll just take your funds away. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, the state of Maine is one of those fascinating states where it's got a couple of large, relatively urban centers that are very, very blue, surrounded by woods and lumberjacks and rednecks who are pretty red. Yep. It's the state that splits its electoral college votes every 4 years because one of the 2 congressional districts votes for Trump. And, so they have a weird system up there. But she's on the wrong side with the voters, and Trump's not letting her off the hook. And what's funny is watching these legislators in California, they're doubling down on supporting biological males and girls sports. In New York and Massachusetts and Maine, they're doubling down on this. And the Republicans are like, Go right ahead.
Why would they do that, though? This has been our theme prior to us talking, Michael. We've been literally having this conversation. Why would they do that? There's no one in the real world that thinks that's okay.
So it pains for me to say this, but you actually said something that made sense right before I came on. You've said nothing that made sense since I've been on.
Nothing. Very rarely do, to be honest.
But you're talking to the previous the callers about who did this, who made the decision to put that guy in. And I think that's why Democrats are sticking with it, is that no one's being held directly responsible. And so they only talk to their base, and then they shimmy, and then when are they held accountable? Now, you could argue that Kamala Harris got held accountable because the issue of biological males in girls' sports and spaces really hurt her in the election. But that's kind of a vague thing. I think if you start seeing things, for example, the University of Pennsylvania says, hey, it's not our fault there was a guy on the girls' team. The people who run college sports said so. Now they're saying today, oh, no. We just said you could do it. We didn't say you have to or not have to. Sure. And so eventually you're going to start having people shamed, and someone's going to look at someone like you and I look at each other, and they're going to say, wait, so you're saying that a guy can say he's a woman and he can compete in a physical contest against women, and you're totally okay with that, and make them explain. And when they start explaining, the average person's going to go, that makes no sense at all. But like you said, if people get named, if they have to say, 100%. Here's why I did it, then it matters.
And what is in fact, we don't hear of this quite so often, but we do hear about it. Almost the worst scenario is the non-binary person who says, I'm non-binary. Well, if you're non-binary, you can join the guys' team, surely, because it would matter. It wouldn't make a difference which one you joined. So you wouldn't have to join the female one. If you're neither one or the other, then join the blokes team, because that's that was your assigned birth. We'll respect you and see how you do. But I bet you $1 million they won't join the blokes team, because there ain't no medals in doing that.
The Wall Street Journal just had an op-ed by the first woman that we know of who lost an NCAA medal to a guy. And he, it was a track meet. I forget how many yards. We use yards, the real system. You guys use that weird thing. But in a sport where winning by 1/10 of a second is a big deal.
Correct.
If I recall correctly, he won by 2 full seconds.
Yeah.
When he was running as a guy, he was like 127th in the rankings. And that's, there it is. There's the whole story right there. So clearly not fair. And I was talking to an activist in the lesbian community there, who's part of a pretty large group of people who are angry that males are claiming womanhood. And they're saying, you don't even know what it's like to be, you come live in my brassiere for a few years and see what it's really like to be a woman and have to go through all the cultural, social, biological stuff. She's very angry. And she said, this is all nonsense about non-binary, blah, blah. She said, when it comes to times when it matters, what sport you compete in, what locker room you're in, there's a very simple test. Either your body makes the part of the egg and sperm that goes in, or your body makes the part that catches what goes in. That's that simple. Whatever and she said, look, you always have people, there are variations out there in the world. Biologically, people the DSS, I think it's called, where there's some confusion. But she said it always comes down to that. Either your body makes what is the sperm, or your body makes what is the egg. If you just divide people that way, your problems go away.
I wish she was my biology teacher back in the day, because we had a fella that told us about a chicken, and I thought, well, why try to do the facts of life with a chicken? This thing lays an egg, for God's sake. The worst example of all things. Listen, Michael, as ever, thank you. Michael Graham, US political commentator. He is the managing editor at Inside Sources. You can check out Inside Sources. There's a plethora of great stories on his site there. Thank you to him. More from you on the way. This is Talk.
When I'm talking to you right now, it's quite heavy air defense battle in Kyiv with quite heavy explosions, meaning that Russia continue to attack big Ukrainian cities every night. It is happening non-stop for many, many, many months. So they are attacking us with kamikaze drones. And to remind you, each Russian kamikaze drones is from 60 to 80 kilograms of explosive materials, and drones like that can destroy a private house easily.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
One here from Tad, who says, I still say, by its very irrefutable definition, an effective deterrent deters. So why the hell are the powers that be so averse to using one? Every criminal has a limit beyond which they will not go, and the rest of us can live in peace, says Tad. And you know, I've read that out because I like reading Tad's messages, but I've got no idea what subject that's referring to. It might have been the gun crime one. It was a very well-written and beautifully crafted message as well. Claire says, no wonder our kids are getting anxiety and depression. They're all being taught about the horrors of climate change and the sun burning us to a crisp. Yeah, and they may not actually be the person they think they are, because they might not really be a boy or a girl. They might not even be a human, for that matter. Back to your calls. This is Kevin in Portsmouth. What have you got for us, Kevin? Net zero, what's happening?
Good afternoon, Ian. You had a caller on earlier who was saying you can't recycle the windmills. Well, you can't recycle the blades because they're basically fiberglass. That's perfectly true. You can do nothing with them, chop them up, throw them in a hole in the ground. The actual towers and the motors and the generators can all be recycled because the motors sitting out of magnets and miles of copper wires. That can all be reclaimed. Donegal, the mad Irishman, who I must confess I missed him, but
he would say he's not mad. He's very correct.
Well, he's not. He's completely wrong. go and look at clintel.org, which is a climate website with proper scientists putting in counter views to his. Basically, his notion that the energy produced is very, very cheap because effectively the fuel, be it wind or be it sun, is free, that's perfectly valid. What he omits to mention is if you've got maritime windmills, the salt water gets into the blades, it gets into the bearings, and they are hellishly expensive to fix because you've got to have special ships. The weather's bad, you can't go out. You've still got to pay the crew, you've still got to pay the lease on the ship. So the costs just escalate. And even on a lovely sunny day like today, the sun's still quite low in the sky, so we're not going to get the maximum benefit from the sun, and it certainly won't be enough to charge, to power the country. There's no wind today at all, not a breath of it.
And it's a simple. I mean, there's certainly irrefutable facts in all of this, aren't there? I mean, people can have their own opinions on the best way forward, but there are some obvious facts of things that, can and will not happen because the elements are in control, not us. Kevin, it's a great call. Thank you very much indeed for that. We'll talk to Harry Cole in just a couple of moments. He's on Drive this afternoon. First, though, time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning those Oasis tickets at Wembley this summer.
How do you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
It is Talk, and Harry Cole has just walked into the studio in a absolute flurry of journalistic creativity. How are you, Harry?
I'm all right. I quite fancy the Oasis tickets, frankly. But yeah,
you're all right. Did you give it a go at the time? Did you try?
I didn't. I thought I don't really do. I don't like queues.
I don't
like queuing for food.
My
I
other
don't
half
like
did
queuing
that stuff. She was there forever. Like, oh no, it's timed out. I'll get a try again. She had a laptop going, an iPad going, something else going.
If it's meant to be, it's meant to be.
Yeah, wrecked an entire Saturday, frankly.
Yeah,
you know, so
the whole weekend.
On that basis alone.
Yeah.
So what is happening?
Well, I mean, you've talked about it already, but this net zero bombshell we've got in the paper this morning.
This was your story.
It was.
We should say that. I did reference it.
This is the leaked document. Here it is.
That is the leaked document.
It is right there at the top. Official, sensitive, business department. It's not the worst case scenario. It's just all the things that could happen. And you know what? It's pretty bleak. And for some reason, they decided to sit on this for 3 years until a concerned citizen decided to pass it to me. And so, thank you to them, because it deserved a wide audience.
Fleet Street and concerned citizens are
concerned
natural
citizens.
bedfellows.
Exactly. Yes. And my favourite one is found in a Westminster photocopier.
Yes, found in a Westminster. And how many civil servants can leave stuff on a bus as well?
That actually does happen. That's remarkable.
Yes. It's remarkable.